In this expected country they know my name. Lesbot. Summary. At the wedding feast, Oberyn and Ellaria are approached by the Master of Whisperers, who begs they indulge him with a discussion of clothing, specifically, Lady Sansa Stark's. Very fine, they all agree, but what a shame, Ellaria tuts, she has lost an amethyst from her hairnet. So when Joffrey begins to cough, they follow her, and find her in the Godswood. Notes. Ha 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 ha, I haven't written fic in 3.5 years, send help. Chapter 1. Chapter text. Oberyn. After the breakfast that morning, Oberyn was nearly ready to insult the entire court by missing the dinner. We have suffered enough, my love, don't you agree, he said, the sweat drying on his skin. He and Ellaria had made good use of the time. She laughed, and kissed his cheek, gave a mighty sigh, and finally pulled herself up from their bed. I agree entirely, my sweet, but alas, that has little to do with how much more we must suffer. She ruffled his hair, and kissed the tip of his nose, but pulled away before he could catch her mouth with his. Ellaria was always playful after their love-making, where he was left enervated, generally ready for a pleasant slumber. She was bright and bubbly as a maiden. You're always so lively after. Really, he complained, refilling their wine glasses from the flagon beside his bed, sweating with the mellowness of the autumn afternoon. It seems entirely unfair that I should have such a reputation for lustiness. Left to my own devices, I would go straight to sleep after our business was completed, but my lady is utterly insatiable, and it would hardly be chivalrous to leave her unfulfilled. Ellaria snorted as she pulled on her shift, sitting back on the bed and turning to him to take the second glass he held out to her. Yes, you poor creature, she said. Thank the gods you have forced me from our bed, that we might do our duty in attending the feast. The interminable feast, he corrected, sitting up. She had tilted her head to the side that she might comb her fingers through her hair, and he could not resist pressing a kiss against the nape of her neck. Ellaria turned and smiled at him, twined the fingers of her free hand with his, and then gave a sigh of her own and stood again, sipping her wine and calling for her maid. They arrived before the main part of the throng, but of course they were not the first to arrive. If they had been, his reputation would have been shot to all the hells. Hardly anyone noticed their entrance, apart from a cluster of the pretty little bride's pretty little cousins, who all giggled and murmured amongst themselves as much as was appropriate. Ellaria managed to turn up glasses of some very pleasant wine, and the two of them found a pleasant spot from which to watch, and be seen, without his Lady Sand seeming too offensive by her mere existence. It was hard to miss the imp and his lady wife when they arrived. Each of them made mock of the other by their presence. That he should have such a wife, who in her loveliness embodied the maiden herself, with a third of the continent to her name besides, seemed to make a jest of Tyrion Lannister, bookish and noseless, never mind his height. That she should have such a husband, stunted, scarred, twice her age, and half drunk already, made a jest of Sansa Stark, who was fair and bright and should now only have started, as a dreamy girl, to even think of marriage. And yet each carried themselves with dignity. At the very moment he was thinking this, someone said beside him, "She is a remarkable creature, is she not? Her bearing is so noble, even now." He turned, and discovered that the spider had joined them. Indeed, he said, there was no danger in acknowledging something the entire court already knew. Lord Varys, Ellaria said with a little more warmth than Oberyn had managed. Yes, though grief tells on the poor girl. Ah, of course, Varys clucked. But even grief, she wears well, such a delicate creature she looks. In fact, it was the Lady Stark I wished to speak of with you. Do forgive the presumption, but I should have felt a villain for neglecting to say anything. I dare say, my lady, that the colors the Lady Stark wears this evening might suit you magnificently. To be sure, the two of you look very different, but you are at least alike in the fact of your beauty. Perhaps it is simply the fineness of the silver that strikes me. I think, though, that you might wear such a shade of violet as lines the lady's sleeves quite as well as she. Do you not agree, Prince Oberyn? Why, they should make a splendid pair together. Even, imagine them side by side, the bright Dornish sun and the pale northern moon, the differences between the two, and such stark differences, if you will excuse the pun, he said, with a little titter, only serving to highlight both the other's beauty and her own. Are you quite sure you are a eunuch, Lord Varys? Oberyn asked. I think you might teach me a thing or two of the enjoyment of women, you speak with such passion. You are unkind to tease me so, Varys said, with theatrical sorrow. Surely you will allow that even a eunuch cannot be entirely ignorant of the concepts of beauty, nor fail to be struck by the idea of two radiant beauties side by side. Why, Sir Elaria said, I almost think you are playing matchmaker. She was always better at feigning innocence than Oberyn. Indeed, Oberyn agreed. Had I not given my brother my word that I should cause no more trouble than necessary, I should ask if you wished to see about whisking her off to our chambers after the festivities came to a close. Or, indeed, perhaps before. We have so few redheads in Dorne, you know, Lord Varys. As to that, my Lord Prince, said Varys, with only the slightest change to his tone, well. The little birds of King's Landing sing such interesting songs. I shall not stoop to gossip as some others in the keep might, with regard to the lady's marriage. By which, of course, he means to remind us of those very rumours. Elaria's hand tightened just enough in his own to tell him that she had thought the same. Ah, yes, he said, exchanging a look with her, she frowning just enough for him to play the devil. I have heard that the imp has not yet found his way to the throat, do you call it? You know, my lord, those wetlands that are the surest path to the north. Anyone but himself and Varys, he thought, would be entirely fooled by Elaria's shocked laughter. My dear, she scolded him, with one more soft squeeze of his hand. The neck, Prince Oberyn, Varys said, and then added, though I should hardly call it the surest path. The twins, after all. The twins, Oberyn repeated, yes, they are another path, but he continued, just a little louder than before, perhaps just loud enough, now, that Sansa Stark might hear him. I cannot imagine any man would wish to deal with the phrase, could he avoid it? No, were I to plan a journey northward, it would be the neck, whatever routes these Lannisters might advise instead. Elaria pressed his hand again, and turned back from the look he'd barely noticed she had cast toward Sansa Stark. My prince, she said, a little louder than her last scolding, but with laughter still dripping off the words like honey, so none might take any of this too seriously. I remarked only on geography, Oberyn said mildly, and nearly missed the gratified glimmer in the eunuch's eye as he gave a little sigh, as if in frustration with the High Lord's jests. Geography, certainly, my Lord Prince, but we spoke of fashion originally, if I might impose enough as to beg you to remember, was all he said. On which note, as I say, Lady Sand, Prince Oberyn, I think you might study the lady closely this evening. Such heavy fabrics would not do for the Dornish clim, of course, but the cut, perhaps in something lighter, would certainly suit. And, as I said, such a striking color, those sleeves. Well worth careful attention, I think, to truly get some sense of the effect. I admit, I am always glad for ideas of new finery suitable for my lady, Oberyn said, raising Elaria's hand to his lips. She smiled, briefly, softly, and then her eyes flicked back toward the Lady Sansa. Well, my dear, and what do you think? I think, she agreed, after a moment more, that you have quite the eye, Lord Varys. Though you're right that such heavy fabrics would not do in Dorne, I must watch the lady closely, so I might gain some sense of what to tell my dressmaker for the gown itself. I think she could capture the spirit of the thing, if I can give her enough detail. Precisely my thought, Varys agreed, and then added, regretfully, but I have taken far too much of your time already, I suppose. I thank you for indulging my whimsy, but let us be frank, the humble spider has no place among such finery. My lady, Prince Oberyn. And then, having bowed his head graciously, he was gone, as if by sorcery. The most remarkable trick, that, a moment, and then there was only a whiff of perfume, and oh, yes, there he was, suddenly just far enough away that you could not catch him without drawing attention to you both. The message was clear enough, something would happen this night, and Sansa Stark would be a part of it, a part which might be easily missed. I suppose, he murmured to Elaria, we must watch the lady closely. How dreadful it will be, spending hours gazing at a beautiful young maiden. A terribly hard duty, that Elaria agreed, just as softly, but there was laughter in her voice. Why, he said, and here I was going to complain of how the weather in this city makes everything more difficult. Such a damp night, is it not? She laughed more loudly at that, enough that the very maiden in question looked over at them. Poised and perfect she was, but the soft smile on her face did not reach her pretty blue-grey eyes. Oberyn could not help winking at her, hoping it might help that smile along, but she only looked startled, and turned away when Mace Tyrell's little mother tottered up to her. After the Queen of Thorns was done with her, Elaria drifted over like a petal on the breeze, tugging Oberyn after her. He made some jest to the imp, who looked even more miserable than his wife, despite still having living family to his name, or, more likely, Oberyn reflected, because he still had living family to his name. For himself, Oberyn gave the lady only a passing smile and bow. She returned the smile. Whatever Elaria had said to her seemed to have softened, at least a little, those Valyrian steel eyes of hers, though they were still as sad and wise as the crones, and curtsied prettily. "You look near as lovely as the bride," Oberyn said, unable to resist trying to make her smile truly. "You are very kind to say so, my prince," she said, but then her husband took her by the elbow and began to guide her inside. "We are required, my lady," he said, his voice only a little thickened by drink. "Anyhow, I cannot be expected to think my wife safe with the Red Viper of Dawn or his lovely, what do they call female snakes?" "Female snakes," Oberyn said dryly. "Ah, good, I was afraid there was some special word, and I had drunk too much and forgotten," Lord Tyrion said, casting a smile back over his shoulder, shortly before he was lost in the mass of people moving in. The poor dear Elaria tutted as they sat, but was interrupted by a servant who saw to their tragically empty wine glasses. After her first sip, she continued, "She has lost one of the amethysts from her hairnet, did you notice? I would have thought a Lannister's jeweler too." Startled, she broke off, for Oberyn had nearly choked on his wine. "And 7 hells, I'll not be the last to choke tonight," he thought, as Elaria clapped him on the back and he shook his head, already wheezing out a laugh before anyone could worry. "Amethysts. Gods, amethysts, and one missing," and the Master of Whisperers notes the color of her gun, and bids the Red Viper of Dawn watch the lady closely. It would not do to be uncertain, of course, and the next time he had a chance, as he leaned in to kiss his lady's cheek and whisper something filthy in her ear, he said instead, "What sort of amethysts?" "Dark. So dark they are black, except when they catch the light." They were black, from where he sat, but the lady had scarce moved throughout the feast. "Perhaps they were onyx instead, only." "Yes," Elaria said, her hand drifting to his hair, one finger toying with a curl as he nuzzled her neck, the two of them just so wanton that some would avert their pious eyes, and not wanton enough that the rest would be eager to watch. "Black amethysts, perhaps they are only onyx, but her sleeves." "Yes," Oberyn agreed, and Elaria kissed his cheek, in turn, and then his mouth, slow and gentle. They barely opened their lips for one another, and they sat with their foreheads resting against each other's for a long moment before turning back to the meal as the next course was served. So it was that, when the idiot Boyking began, in the midst of goading his uncle, to cough, Oberyn Martell's and Elaria Sands might have been the only eyes that were not on Joffrey or the imp, but on the latter's lady wife. He squeezed Elaria's hand, and she squeezed his in return, and as the crowd began to grow louder, laughing as if the entire thing were part of the planned japery, they were able to rise and make their way through the hall, as if needing to find the privy, or perhaps steal a bit of time alone together. But the king continued to cough. Oberyn and Elaria did not need to look, they knew what it was that would have the crowd beginning to quiet, to murmur, even as many kept laughing. The king continued to cough, and Oberyn kept watching Sansa Stark. She slipped away nearly as quickly as Varys had, as the king's coughing grew quieter, to be replaced by a thin, desperate wheeze of breath. Fortunately, having been warned to pay special attention to the lady's gown, he caught a glimpse of cream, a flash of violet, a gleam of amethysts, and was able to follow. That made all the difference, as, behind them, the laughter in the great hall began to turn to gasps, then to screams. The commotion of hundreds fleeing was a little muted for them by that time, as they followed the lady. Sansa. Sansa had managed her dress on her own, though it took time, but what stopped her was her hairnet. It had come off easily enough, but she noticed the missing stone, and then. He said there was magic in them, she remembered suddenly. Magic and home. That was stupid, that had just been some drunkard's fancy. If they meant home, she could sell the stones, he had said they were precious. The silver and the stones would pay their passage, that was all he meant. Even if one was missing, there were a score of others, those would get her far enough. But she stood frozen, nonetheless, staring at the empty place where the stone should have been. When she heard footsteps, she was glad for them, glad for something to stop the thoughts that were beginning to take shape in her mind like swelling storm clouds. She was about to call out when she realized that it wasn't Sir Dontos who approached. The steps were too light, too certain, for the poor drunken fool, and she realized suddenly that there was more than one set, that more than one person was walking, soft and quick and steady, towards her. She was glad she hadn't called out, but that lasted only a moment longer, for even as she was casting about desperately for some place she might conceal herself, someone called out to her. Lady Sangza. She knew the voice, but she could not quite place it, until he came into view, and the striking dark woman close behind him. When she recognized them, she gasped. "You," she blurted out, before remembering herself. "Why would it be him, you stupid girl? What would he care for helping you go home? Gods, if they should be here when Dontos arrives, if he should say something." "I beg your pardon, Prince Oberyn, Lady Sand," she said, dipping into a curtsy and hoping the light was dim enough that they could not see her fear. "Not at all, Lady Stark," he said lightly, but when she chanced to look up, there was something strange in his face, it seemed to her. He knows. But that was stupid, too. There had been others fleeing the Great Hall, too, and anyway, what could he know? She was only missing a stone from her hairnet, that was all. Just be quiet, they will pass by and go back too. She remembered, then, that the Dornish had settled outside of the Red Keep. There was no reason for them to be in the gardens. "What he means," the woman said, in her warm voice, "is that the fault is ours, my lady. We took you unawares, which was most unkindly done." "Oh," was all she managed. They did not pass her by, they only stood and looked at her, and oh, where was Dontos? "You have changed your clothes, my lady," said the prince. "A shame, your gown suited you, my lady, and I thought we might like to see it more closely." He reached for her, and she thought of all the awful things Joffrey had said about the Dornish, the stories she had heard about Prince Oberyn's appetites, but surely with his lady there, he could not want, except no, the two of them might, but a little part of her was relieved by that thought. If all they wanted was a few kisses, or even more, that would still be less terrible than if he knew, wouldn't it? He was to sit on the council, if he knew, if he guessed. Sir Eileen no longer had ice at the wedding breakfast, she remembered, but she could not decide if that would be better or worse. But he did not seize her, or cry for the guards, or embrace her cruelly. He only took the hairnet from her hands, and gazed at it. Sansa felt as if she might fly to pieces at any moment, and she clasped her hands in front of her to stop them shaking. If he meant to do something to her, if he meant to have her, a part of her wished that he would just get it over with. It could not be more terrible than the beatings. And they said that septars and great ladies and whores alike had thrown themselves at him, so perhaps he would even see that she enjoyed it, or at least use some strange potion to make her think she enjoyed it, or even just to make her sleep through it, anyway. Even if he did not, well, he did not have so very long before the guards would find them, so he must needs be quick about it. And once it was over and he left her here, Dontos would find her, and he could deliver her home, as he had promised. She already had so much to weep for when she was safe within Winterfell's walls. Knowing that she would reach a place of safety, it was easier to think of adding one more thing to the list. And just think how the Lannisters would rage, if I finally got with child and it was Oberyn Martell's bastard, she thought, half hysterical. But he did not throw her down and ravish her. He did not do much of anything. "You have lost an amethyst," was all Prince Oberyn said, and when he looked up from it, the strange thing she thought she had seen in his eyes was still there. It was as if he were waiting for something, expecting something from her, but... "It's vengeance for your father," she remembered, suddenly. Dontos had said it, when he gave her the hairnet, and the stormy thoughts that the prince and his lady had interrupted all loomed above her again. "No," she whispered, staring at it. "If only all he had meant to do was to kiss me, or even worse, I could have borne that. Gods, he's going to raise the hue and cry, or he's going to rape me and then raise the hue and cry, and then Sir Eileen." Joff had a new Valyrian sword as a wedding present from his father that morning, and Sir Eileen's sword had been plain old steel. "It wouldn't even be ice, that might have been better, at least the last thing I'd feel would be from home." Her knees had turned to jelly, and she did not realize that she was falling until Lady Sand caught her by the elbow. "My prince, you're frightening her," she murmured, an arm going round her shoulders. Her touch was gentle and her hands were warm and gentle as her lady mother's. "No, there was something else to her, a strength as well. Her lady mother had been strong, but this was a different strength. Different and yet also familiar, she could almost place it. Of course. Yes. My lady, he went on, in the strangest gentle tone, looking at Sangza with those dark eyes, I imagine you need to recover yourself, and I would that we might linger long enough, but I do not trust that we have the time. Once you are safely situated in my household outside the keep, we shall try to make sense of this, but in the meantime. The bells were ringing all over the city, as they had done for King Robert. Sangza looked once more around the godswood for some sign of Sidontos, but there was none. There was only Prince Oberyn, offering to take her out of the keep. But he was a snake, he was the snake, he was the viper, and... She remembered, suddenly, something her lord father had spoken of only rarely, obliquely, and how sad and tired he would sound when he did speak of it. He and the old king, the sad old drunken king, had quarreled, her lady mother had told her one day. Sangza had begged to go south, again and again and yet again. The Warden of the North should go to court at least once, shouldn't he? And it was meet that he should take his eldest son and daughter when he did, wasn't it? He wouldn't be ashamed of her, she promised, he wouldn't, she would be ever so careful, she was a good girl, just like Rob was a good boy. They should go south someday, Mother had explained gently, at last, when Sangza was just 11 and Mother had told them that King Robert and half his court were coming to Winterfell. She had told them all about that one morning, but then she asked Rob and Sangza to come with her to her own solar, and break their fast with her, privately. They should, and of a certainty would, go south someday, Mother explained. Sangza and Rob for certain, at least to visit court, and on the way there or on the way back they would visit Riverrun, to see their mother's home and meet their grandfather and uncle, and perhaps even the Eyrie, where their lord father and King Robert himself had been fostered, and they would meet their aunt and their little cousin Robert, who had returned there after Lord Arryn's death. And probably Bran would be some knight's squire someday, him or Rickon, and Arya. Will Arya be a squire too? She'll like that, Rob had said, grinning. Mother sighed, but the lines at the corners of her eyes grew a little deeper, and her eyes seemed bluer, and they knew that, inside at least, she was smiling. Sangza and Rob looked at each other and then quickly looked away, trying to be as grown up as Mother and hide their own grins, too. Smiling at last, at the sight of the both of them, Mother had continued. Well, she said, many little girls were even wilder than Arya, if they could imagine such a thing, but mostly they grew out of such wildness, and even if she didn't, they were queer about things in Dorne, and the heir to Starfall was about Arya's age, and the Danes especially liked father, for the sake of certain persons, certain memories. Here her eyes grew a little less happy. Oh, Mother had said after a moment, sighing and sipping from her own cup, then, with the most beautiful grown-up little twinkle in her eye again, adding a dash of wine to Sangza and Rob's cups of water, no more than a thimbleful for each of them, really, but it had served to make Sangza feel quite grown up, and even though he rolled his eyes at her, she saw how Rob sat up a little straighter as well. But listen to me. You two are so grown up already, I almost forget myself. Ironically, when I forget myself, I become almost a girl again. Perhaps we are all meeting in the middle, HM. It almost made Sangza blush, to remember how easily she had believed her, except that Mother must have known how much she wanted to believe her, and Rob too, and said it all for their sakes. She was trying to make us feel better, to make us understand that this was something grown-up she trusted us with. Knowing, now, all that she had explained, she realized too that Mother had been trying to strengthen them, to help them feel safe for what she was about to say. Yes, Rob and Sangza and one or more of the others would go south sometime, Mother began again. But perhaps not to King's Landing, at least at first. And they must not tell this story to Arya or their little brothers. It was for Mother to tell them such things, to help them understand. You, especially, my sweeterling, she said to Sangza. And Arya too, when I tell her, but this is why I must tell her. You must understand that what happened was, if you ever fear anything like it from any man. She looked then from Sangza, whose hand she was holding, to Rob. It is terrible, and I would never have either of you know such awful things can happen in the world. The truth is a sword, it seems to me. When her children are still very young, it is a mother's place to shield them from it. But as they grow older, she does better by them to arm them with it instead. So it was that Sangza and Rob came to learn the full story of what happened 15 years before. Her lord father and King Robert had been the best of friends, they had grown up together, they had been like brothers, they would have been brothers except for Rhaegar Targaryen stealing away their Aunt Lyanna. That should have brought them all the closer together, and it had, mother said, in some ways, they had gone to war together, after all, when Jon Arryn refused to hand over their heads. But at the end, after it was already done, and Rhaegar was dead, then they had parted over what had befallen the Princess Elia and her children. Her lord father could not forgive it. Forgive what? Sansa asked. Robb had her hand held up in his big strong one now, as if to give her strength, but his eyes were huge and bright, and she knew, somehow, that it would be easier for him if she said it. It was something terrible, certainly, that was why he held her hand, but it was more all right for her to be less patient. Even if she was almost a lady, she was still littler, and a girl besides. Mother closed her eyes, and sighed, and then took each of their free hands in one of her own. Gently, softly, quietly, she explained to them what Tywin Lannister's men had done to Princess Elia, and to her babes. A gentle summer snow had been falling, she could still see the flakes whirling like dancers across the glass of Mother's window as Oberyn Martell met her gaze with his own. "You hate the Lannisters," she whispered, nearly delirious with mingled terror and hope. "I do." His dark eyes flashed. The smile he gave did not reach his eyes, and it would have been frightening, it should have been frightening, except that she also knew it from deep in her own heart. A secret place she never let herself remember was there, because she could not risk anyone in the keep seeing it. But there was some of that strange gentleness in those eyes too, she thought, that fierce gentleness that she had recognized in the Lady Sand's touch, though she still could not place it. "I do," he said again. "I despise them. Lady Stark, if you will place your trust in me now, I swear, by the old gods and the new, that so long as I draw breath they shall not take you unwilling from my protection." He understood, somehow. He knew what she feared. And he had called her Lady Stark. No one had ever called her that. Her mother had been Lady Stark, and when she died Sansa was already wed, but no one called her Lady Lannister, either, and that had been a tiny mercy. She was only Sansa, or sometimes Lady Sansa, though whoever called her that usually did so as mockery. "I am the Lady of Winterfell, though, the Lady Stark, I am. Her hand was shaking still as she placed it in his, and though, as he said, they did not have long, he lingered to place his other hand over it. He did not grip it hard, just enough to help the shaking stop. "Here," he said, kneeling to retrieve, with his free hand, the cloak she had dropped. Lady Sand took it from him before Sansa could, though, and draped it around her shoulders, embracing her briefly while the prince was still holding her hand. "My ladies?" he asked, and his smile was a little gentler now. "Ladies?" That was it, she realized dimly, as they guided her through the shadows, past the guards. The way they spoke to her, the way they touched her, warm and gentle and fiercely protective. They were strange and wild, and somehow she felt safer with them than she had since before Baela's September, since before King Robert died, since the Neck. Lady would have loved them, that was why she had gone with them. She could almost see her now, padding alongside them, licking the Lady Sand's hand and nipping at the prince's. She used to wrestle with the others, not as often as they did with each other, but she usually won when she did join in, even though she was the smallest of the litter. She would let Lady Sand help me brush her fur, and she would wrestle with Prince Oberyn, and nip at him, and he would laugh and she would bark and wag her tail. The thought made her smile, and when she tried to bite it back, to look as somber and frightened as she ought, she remembered, once more, Joffrey's dead. Lady, she thought, as they walked right out of the keep, no one in the crowd even glancing at her. She felt as if, should she look to the side, she would see her wolf trotting politely next to them, pretty and soft and ready to kill any man who tried to stay them. "Lady, they have set us free." Chapter 2. Notes. Chapter 2 was going to be longer, but I think the next bit actually works better with Chapter 3, by which I mean it's now about as long as Chapter 2 and still going, and is well on the way to becoming its own chapter, even though I thought it was part of Chapter 2 and Chapter 2 was mostly done except for a bit of fine-tuning. What is even happening? Also, I am still working through the comments on Chapter 1, because I've gotten more in the past few days than I'm used to getting in a year. But in the meantime, thank you all so frigging much. As I mentioned, I haven't posted fic in years. Then a couple of months ago Branwen and I got to talking because she'd started watching the show and reading the books, which I'd been trying for months to get people I know to do so I could yell about my feelings with someone, to no avail, and it turns out we both had so many Sansa and Martell feelings. And then we got to talking and this was the first fic that came into my head, which I mentioned but wrote off as way too complicated and or for me to handle, and she convinced me that it might not be as complicated as I was thinking, and here we are. Anyway, if you like the little I've done so far, you should definitely go read her fic, because she's a better writer than I am and a faster one, which doesn't seem fair. Chapter text. Oberyn. The imp had established them in a corner fort of the Red Keep, but it had not been enough for all his party. They had removed themselves to some houses about halfway between the keep and the Iron Gate, he and Ellaria taking up residence in a manse at the center of the lot, built around a passably pretty garden. The Lannisters, he was told, hardly knew what to make of this, and found themselves in a state of offended relief. It was harder for any Dornishman to tangle with the roses strewn about the palace, which was a relief, but of course it was a snub, as well, and one more reminder of the debt they had yet to pay. Their consternation helped him feel less foolish for the decision. The size, of course, had been a concern, but the truth was, he had not slept well until his first night in their manse. What sleep he managed to find was plagued by old dreams, and even as he cursed himself for a fool, Ellaria had told him she'd had quite enough of his stubbornness, and far too much of such the crowded keep besides. He sketched all of this out on the walk from the Godswood outside of the keep, idly, mostly to be saying something. But perhaps he told the ladies, as he helped them both into the litter, the gods had something further in mind. Lady Stark had not spoken since the Godswood, had hardly seemed to notice what was going on, but she looked at him now, and, briefly, he thought he caught a glimpse of a smile. Perhaps she said, before Ellaria, with one final wink at him, closed the curtain. The litter was large enough for three, in truth, but it would be close. He rode alongside them, and though he could not make out the words, he heard Ellaria murmuring, and, once in a very long while, a soft answer from Sansa. Ellaria insisted on giving over her own rooms for the ladies' use, as the second finest in the house. They were more suited to a lady of her rank than any of the others. Sansa protested vaguely, but seemed too distracted to do much more, and in such a state, she would be no match for Ellaria. Oberyn was tempted to offer her his bed in jest, but the poor child was trembling with emotion already, and in no fit state for such japery. Indeed, there seemed to him a good chance that if he did say such, she might just bolt back out into the night. That she should be overwhelmed was quite understandable. He itched all over with curiosity and excitement himself. In truth, he wanted nothing so much as to sit down with her and hear everything immediately, but he must also admit to himself that neither of them would get much from such an interview as they were at the moment. Her current wakefulness, he'd wager, was the stuff of battle madness, and he knew that well enough. It would not last much longer, and when it was spent, all the silvery strength he'd caught flashes of would be used up, and she would need rest. As for himself, he could almost hear his brother's voice. Most of the sensible things he thought, his mind tended to speak in Doran's voice, or with Ellaria's, telling him that he hardly knew what questions to ask her just yet. Bidding the lady good night, left for his own rooms to wait for Ellaria. Besides, she was saying as she drew Sansa off, I spend most nights in my prince's bed, so mine stands empty far too often. I almost feel sorry for the poor thing, and I shall sleep more easily knowing it has been given purpose again. Oberyn was not certain, but he thought he heard a soft laugh, more a smiled breath than a real laugh, and like as not it was from nerves, not any true mirth, but he was surprised how much it pleased him nonetheless. Indeed, he was a little envious that Ellaria, not he, was the one who drew it out of her. On consideration, he had never seen her laugh. He had hardly exchanged 10 words with the lady before today, to be sure, but something told him that she had not been laughing much where he could not see. That must change, whatever becomes of her, he decided, as he took off his boots back in his bedchamber. He said as much to Ellaria when she joined him not long after she had joined him in bed, curling up with her head on his chest. She turned just enough to kiss the bottom of his chin. "My prince has a tender heart," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Why, I cannot imagine how he came to have such a fearsome reputation." He laughed, and caught one of her hands, pressing a kiss to the inside of her wrist. "You have found me out. But you must keep my secret, my lady, I have worked so very hard at cultivating the reputation you speak of. Nonsense, she said, the fingers on her free hand playing along his stomach, stopping to circle his navel. Why, I think I shall send forth the ravens first thing tomorrow, unless you can make a very good argument why I should not. Oberyn's answer was to catch that hand as well, and roll on top of her. She gave a little squeal of laughter as he pinned her wrists above her head, and he could not resist tasting that laugh for himself. Poor Lady Stark, Oberyn murmured, trailing kisses along her chin, her cheeks, over to one of her ears. She had as much energy to work off as I do, it seemed to me, and nothing half so pleasant on which to spend it. Ellaria turned her head and gave him a strange little smile, but kissed him before he could ask her what it meant. They had only just finished when there was a knock at the door. "Lady," came the soft voice of Ellaria's maid. "One moment, Zia," Ellaria called back, donning her robe and tying it loosely before padding over to the door. The girl did not even blush. He would like to think it was because she was so used to coming on them still cooling after their love-making, but the troubled look on her face said something different. Sansa, he thought, but surely if it were something truly urgent she wouldn't have waited. Zia has more sense than that. Zia spoke too low for him to hear, but he could not miss Ellaria's gasp or the way she paled, the way her hand flew to her mouth in horror. He was on his feet at once, grabbing his own robe and joining them, but Ellaria waved him back. "Old, you said?" she asked, and the maid nodded. Ellaria swallowed, and finally said, "She seemed strong enough in the Godswood. Best just to let her sleep, then, and once she has settled in, a maester can see to her." "Yes," the girl said, and bobbed a little curtsy. "I beg your pardon for intruding, lady, my prince, but I thought you would wish to know at once." "And you were quite right," it seems Oberyn said, raising an eyebrow at Ellaria, who gave him only a brief, troubled look. "I know I need hardly say it, Zia," she said, "but no one'll hear of it from me, lady," the girl said firmly, "and if any of the other girls sees to her, I'll make sure none hear of it from them, neither." "Of course they won't. Thank you. You ought to get some sleep as well, then." The maid bobbed a curtsy and left them. Some of the color had returned to Ellaria's face, but her eyes were far away as she turned. "Lady Stark is well," he prompted. Ellaria nodded, sinking down into a chair. She did not need help in changing, whatever dress she chose, she had managed herself. She meant to meet someone, Oberyn said, unsurprised. She would not have wanted to rouse her maid's suspicion. But she was not sure who it might be. "I think, she was surprised when we found her in the Godswood." Another nod, distracted. "Yes. But that is not the trouble." As Zia was giving her a shift, she caught a glimpse. Lady Stark's back was a horror. She was all scars, from her shoulders to the backs of her knees. None were fresh, so Zia did not remark upon them in the moment, or think we must be interrupted, but, "Gods be good, Oberyn." "Joffrey." No sooner had Oberyn thought it than he was speaking the name. "My brother charged us to watch Myrcella closely during her first weeks in Sunspear, do you recall? It was because there had been rumors about her brother. The girl had been as sweet as any child he had ever seen, however, sweeter, indeed, than he had been at her age, and there had been nothing that troubled him, nor had Doran spoken of any such when they all removed to the Water Gardens a few months later. Surely not, Ellaria protested. That the boy was cruel and foolish we saw for ourselves, but she was a hostage. To use a hostage, so, she was his betrothed, Oberyn, and a hostage, and little more than a child. But he knew Ellaria's voice, all its tones and changes. The horror he heard as she spoke was not truly disbelief. For himself, there was a roar in his ears, like the wind on a mountain top, but carried on that wind he thought he heard a woman screaming, and the wailing of babes. He had not heard such things in some time. His heart had begun to calm in the years since he had found Ellaria. The fires of rage and grief had ceased to swallow him from the inside, so perhaps he was mistaken, but he thought that where he had always heard one lady, now there was a second. There seemed to be very little air in the room. He ought to speak, he ought to comfort his lady, but all his words had disappeared, and he stared at the fire, past it, seeing nothing. "She only trusted herself to us," someone said, and he realized dimly that it was his own voice. "After I told her that I hate the Lannisters." He thought, from the corner of his eye, that Ellaria nodded, but he was not certain. His breath came slowly, in tiny sips of air, and he stared through the fire and saw only blood on the red keep's floor. A touch on his hand started him, and he saw that Elaria's dark, sweet eyes were focused on him now. None of them were fresh, she reminded him gently. Had they been, we would wake the Maester at once. She was well enough that we never would have guessed, and you swore to her, by gods old and new, that the Lannisters will not have her again unwilling so long as you draw breath. And so they will not, he vowed, again. Ellaria kissed the back of his hand, gently, and then stood. We ought to sleep as well, she said. I do not think we are clear of this storm yet. No, Oberyn agreed, but he did not follow her as she returned to bed. It was some time before her breathing slowed, and he knew that she had fallen asleep. Once he was certain, he began to dress, and put his dagger on his belt. He took the chair from his desk as he passed through his solar, and once he reached Ellaria's door, now Lady Stark's, he set it down silently, and took his seat. Even if the Lannisters knew where she was, he could not think that they would be foolish enough as to break into his home and steal her from her bed. And if they are, there are guards aplenty between the gates and this door. But then, even as he told himself how ridiculous this was, he thought, why, it would take the Mountain himself to have a chance of taking her from me. So, perhaps for that very reason, he did not stand again, but stayed, toying with his dagger and listening to the soft, homely sounds of night time, listening for the sound of steel boots and heavy armor. Ellaria was right, he reflected. They had much sailing to do before they passed through the storm. Perhaps he would have time to see all the Lannisters drowned. Ellaria. Ellaria was not surprised to find Oberyn gone when she woke the next morning, his place in the bed long cold. Drawing on her robe, she made her way to her own rooms, and was equally unsurprised to find him sitting outside the door, idly tossing a dagger between hands. "Forgive me, my dear," he said, rising. "A notion took me, and—" Oberyn trailed off, and glanced toward the closed door. She thought she heard soft movement within, whether Zia's or Lady Stark's, she could not have guessed. "We shall be quite all right, my gallant prince." She put a hand on his neck and bent him down to kiss him. "I shall break my fast with the lady, and while you get some sleep, I shall see to her. If she seems to be ailing, of course I shall send for the Maester at once. Since she seems strong enough, though, I think it might be easier on her to let her settle in first. Once we have both had time to speak with her, then a Maester can see to her. Perhaps a Scepter, too," he said. There were dark shadows under his eyes, and she thought he had softened a little at the kiss, but he still did not smile. "They say the imp never bedded her, but if her scars are as terrible as Zia says—" Her heart seemed to seize again, but she said nothing, only stroked her prince's hair. "Oberyn, you need to sleep." He did smile now, just a little. "I have grown old," he complained, his eyes still haunted. "Why, 20 years ago, this would only be the start of a grand few days' adventure, with sleep a prize at the end." She snorted, and gave him a shove in the direction of his rooms. "Sleep? This is not 20 years ago, thank the gods." He gave her one last smile as he walked off, carrying the chair with him, but the haunted look never left his eyes that she could see. Sighing, she knocked softly. "It is only Ellaria," she called, opening the door slowly. Sansa Stark was sitting up in bed, clutching the covers about her, though she still wore her shift. "My lady," she said, moving to rise. "Forgive me." The apology was a little pinprick in Ellaria's heart now that Zia had told her about the girl's scars, and she noted that the girl's eyes were near as shadowed as Oberyn's had been even as she smiled and waved her apology away. "On the contrary, my lady," she said. "You must forgive me for intruding. In my haste last night, I forgot to see to having any clothes for today brought over to my prince's rooms for me. I know I might have sent a maid, but I must confess, you will learn it soon enough, if you have not worked it out already, so I may as well tell you now, I am a silly old hen who can rarely resist clucking over any chick unlucky enough to cross her path." Sansa's shy smile might have been the first little flower of spring, it did Ellaria such good to see it. "At any rate," she said, slipping behind the screen as Zia handed her a gun, "I shall give you your privacy in a moment. There is a pretty view of our little gardens from my solar, and it always does me good to break my fast there is so little greenery in this city. But if you wish to sleep longer, you must do so. I can take my breakfast in my prince's solar as easily as here, or even in the gardens themselves. No, my lady, Sansa said, as Ellaria stepped out from behind the screen. Dornish fashions were simpler, and Ellaria rarely required Zia's assistance. I had already wakened, Zia was only fetching my gown. As you like, Ellaria said, giving the girl another smile as she gathered a few hairpins. I shall leave you to it, then, join me whenever you like. Sansa dressed quickly as well. Ellaria hardly had time to open the curtains and window and frown from her little balcony across the gardens to her prince's solar, where she saw Oberyn standing on his own little balcony, gazing down at the fountain. She nearly shouted to him that he must sleep, so it was likely just as well that Sansa entered then, clad in the dark gown she had changed into last night, before they found her in the Godswood. Ellaria tutted when she saw her. Oh, we shall have to find you things to wear. You are a little taller than I am, but I think some of my gowns can be let out, at least, don't you, Zia? Yes, my lady, Zia said. I thought the green one, to start with. How clever of you, Ellaria exclaimed, and explained to Lady Sansa, it is a lovely dress, just the color of new leaves in spring, but I never felt I did it justice. It will suit you beautifully, though. Yes, certainly, the green one, and pick a few others, at least. Once things are more settled, we shall send to the Red Keep for your things, but in the meantime, she stopped, for the young lady had gone white. Is that, my lady, will that be safe for Prince Oberyn? If, when the Queen learns that I am here, he must not put himself into danger on my behalf. Sansa's voice was soft, nearly strangled, and Ellaria crossed the room to her. The dear thing stiffened, just a little, before Ellaria could take her into her arms as she wished. But she supposed she ought to be grateful for that. They had barely exchanged 3 words before yesterday, and Ellaria knew that, just as she had warned, she was only being a silly old hen. She settled for taking Sansa's hands in hers, instead. My prince made you a vow, she said, looking into the girl's silvery blue eyes. Sansa had not looked away, but her eyes seemed to see through Ellaria, to look past her, the way her prince had looked last night, when Zia had come to them, the way she expected he looked now, gazing down at the fountain, though of course he was too distant to be certain. The Lannisters will not have you unwilling. He swore as much again last night. My lady, may I tell you something? Sansa only nodded, her eyes still far away. Glancing across the gardens, she saw that Oberyn's balcony stood empty, which was some relief, at least. She still didn't know whether he was sleeping, but she would tell Daemon to report to her later, and see to it that he did, one way or another. My prince is only now abed, since I woke and came to you. He sat the whole night through outside your door, to ensure that you were properly guarded. Sansa seemed not to hear for a moment, but then her eyes snapped, suddenly, back to Ellaria's, and widened a little. He did not need to do that, my lady, was all she said. I have no doubt that I am quite safe here. And so you are, Ellaria said, squeezing her hands, just a little. They were very cold. But you are mistaken, I think, in saying that he did not need to do it. He did, for his own sake as much as yours. It was the same with the vow he made you in the Godswood. It was for your sake, to be sure. But it was for his own, also, and his brothers besides. The Martells have learned at great cost how dangerous the Red Keep can be. Slowly, some color seemed to have returned to Lady Stark's face. Yes, she said. I would ask that you give him my thanks, my lady. He has been very kind to me. You both have, she added, dropping her gaze. Really, you need not trouble yourself about my clothes. This will suit well enough. Nonsense, Ellaria said, and gave the girl's hands one last squeeze, then tucked Sansa's arm under hers and guided her to the breakfast table. As I say, the green gown never quite suited me anyway, and there is no sense in letting it lay in some trunk unused for the moths to feast on when there is a lady here who can not only make use of it, but who will look far finer in it than I ever did besides. The dresses of the bastard paramour of the Prince of Dawn's younger brother are hardly fine enough for a lady of your station, but they will do, for the moment. Demure as she was, Sansa could not quite hide the startled look that crossed her face. I cannot think they will be anything but lovely, my lady. You have fine taste, from what I have seen. Forgive me if I've shocked you, Ellaria said, pouring them both cold watered wine, flavored with a little bit of lemon and blood orange. Such things are less politely spoken of in the rest of the 7 kingdoms, I know. Bastardy is less of a shame in Dorne, I think, than it is here. Oberyn cannot marry me, of course, but his brother has 3 children already, all of whom precede Oberyn, to say nothing of any children they might have, so there is less need for him to produce a true-born heir anyway. You have a half-brother of your own, do you not? Jon Snow, Sansa said, taking a few berries from the tray of fruit. He joined the Night's Watch. He was born in Dorne, I think. I had heard something of that, Ellaria said. Have you any news of him recently? There is talk of a great ranging, but of course we hear little of the Watch so far south. No, my lady, was all Sansa said. She seemed about to say more, but took up her cup to sip from it instead. She did not eat much so far, that Ellaria could see, but then, there had been 77 courses last night, which would fill one up. She did not have such a great appetite herself just yet. She waited a little longer, and then Sansa added, more softly than ever, I had little correspondence. Ellaria could not help sking at that, though she supposed it was hardly a surprise. HMPH. To be sure. Well, if you wish to write to him, we shall be happy to find some paper and ink for you, was all Ellaria said. Once word reaches him of the wedding, I do not doubt he will be glad to hear that you are safe, and I expect he has all sorts of exciting news from the Wall. Besides, my daughter Lorza is quite mad for stories of the Watch, as it happens. I don't think she entirely believes that the Wall exists. You may not be surprised to hear that such an abundance of ice is difficult to picture in Dorne. She was rewarded, then, with another of those shy smiles. There it is, Ellaria said, beaming herself. Do you know, Oberyn thought he heard you laugh at some silly thing I said last night, and he was more than passingly jealous. Men are always so determined to be the first at everything, and I had to give him a good many kisses to make up for having been the first to make you laugh, that he had seen. Sansa's cheeks went pink then, and she began to stammer something, and Ellaria laughed a little, and reached out to pat the girl's hand in apology. I have shocked you again, my lady, I am sorry. Here I meant this breakfast to be a calm affair, to help you settle in more easily. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable, only to affirm to you that so long as you are part of his household, my prince intends that everything should be done for your comfort and happiness. I expect there is more hardship to come yet, but every man and woman here will do their utmost to shield you from it, or at least to strengthen you against it. Sansa did not answer that, only looked up from Ellaria's hand on hers long enough to meet her eyes, then turned her head away. She was silent about it, but Ellaria could not miss the slow, trembling breath she drew, and it took all her strength not to leap from her chair and take the lady into her arms as she would one of her own girls. The only thing that stopped her was the knowledge that, if such commonplace kindness as she had shown thus far was enough to overwhelm Lady Stark, such an embrace might only do more harm than good in the moment. She contented herself, instead, with squeezing the hand that still rested under hers, then finding one of her handkerchiefs and sliding it, quietly, within reach of Sansa's fingertips. I thank you, my lady, she said, as she took the handkerchief and dashed it, quickly, to her eyes. Her voice was thick with emotion, but it was no whisper, at least. That, Ellaria reflected, as she hummed some mild courtesy and piled a few slices of her peach onto Sansa's plate, was something. Chapter 3. Notes. I've only just caught up on the comments to the first chapter and started responding to those on the second, so obviously it was a good idea to post the third. Apologies for being so slow to reply, I'm not used to getting so much feedback, and it's all been so kind. I'm so glad that people are enjoying it, and I'm always delighted to hear from you, even though I am terrible about replying in any kind of timely fashion. Chapter text. Sansa. It was a relief in the afternoon, when Prince Oberyn finally wakened and summoned her to his solar, to have something more than Lady Sand's kindness to face. Ellaria, my dear, you must call me Ellaria, she had said once or twice. She did not seem to mind when Sansa forgot, but that only made her feel worse, so she was trying to avoid saying much at all for the time being. She was as warm and merry as Margaery had been in the beginning, but where Margaery had been small and dainty and lively as a hummingbird, Ellaria Sand was more patient and languid. Like spring and summer, Sansa thought, as they sat in the little courtyard at the center of the prince's household. Lady Sand had some letters from the Water Gardens about her daughters, and she had found a few books of stories and poems that she thought Sansa might enjoy, which made a fine excuse for her to sit with her thoughts. Oh, it was so hard to remind herself how quickly Margaery had left her behind, and of how kind Queen Cersei had been at the beginning, too. It made her heart ache to think of it, to try to think of how, or why, or when, Lady Sand's kindnesses might dry up, too, just like Margaery's and the Queen's. More, it made her weary, trying to spot the true motive behind all their kindnesses, Lady Sand's and her maidsirs and the other maids and Prince Oberyn's squires. It is easier in the Red Keep, in some ways, she found herself thinking, as she sat silently, her eyes passing the same verse over and over without her ever really reading it. No one really notices me for the sake of any kindness there, so there is no need for me to study everything sweet and try to find the trap it baits. She still thought she realized. She must be careful of that around Prince Oberyn. He had promised her she would not have to go back. That was too good to be true, she thought, deep down, but she must not insult his honor by saying so out loud. Who knew what he might do with her in his disgust? Just then, though, Demon Sand came upon them, and told them that the prince begged their company. Sansa's insides seemed to freeze, but she told herself that at least now she would know what he intended to do with her. She was still a hostage here, she thought, and if he meant to tell her as much, well, it seemed a nicer prison than the keep had been so far. She wished there were a Godswood, though. I hope you do not mind if I join you, Ellaria said, as they made their way back inside. If there is aught you would speak of privily, only say so, and I shall withdraw. But my prince and I thought you might be more at your ease if were there as well. I know the tales they tell of him, and so we thought a chaperone might suit. Sansa felt herself redden, and hardly knew how to answer. The prince has been very kind to me, my lady, she finally said. Ellaria took Sansa's arm with her own, and patted her hand. Be at ease, sweeterling. The tales about Dorne, and my prince in particular, are hardly of your own making. Even if they were, I dare say Oberyn and I should be too impressed at your spreading them so far and wide to take any offense. You certainly need not make apologies for having heard them. He wishes only, now that we have all had some time to rest and recover, to try to make sense of everything. So do I, Sansa said. That, at least, was the unvarnished truth. Indeed, she could not recall when she had last felt so certain of something she said. Yes, I should expect so, Ellaria said, with a sympathetic smile, as they reached an open door and she guided Sansa through it. Prince Oberyn, she saw briefly, had been out on the small balcony by his window, looking down over the gardens bathed in the afternoon light, but he came back in as they entered. My ladies, he said, with perfect graciousness, bowing to them both. Sansa meant to extract her arm from Ellaria's and dip into a curtsy, but the other woman only snorted, and Sansa had to manage a sort of bobbing half-curtsy. He says ladies, but I assure you, Lady Stark, the courtesies are entirely for your benefit, she said, but there was a fond smile on her face as she looked at him, and sweet little crinkles in the corners of her eyes. He has been most generous, my lady, Sansa said, which seemed safest. Well, I am certainly glad to see he has not forgotten all his manners. I dare say you are quite useful to have around. She drew Sansa over to the breakfast table, and the prince pulled out her chair for her, and then Ellaria's, as well. He took Ellaria's hand briefly, and kissed it, with the same soft look in his eyes as she had for him. The sight of their affection for each other brought a strange lump to Sansa's throat, and she distracted herself by trying to look about without seeming to stare. Why, it's no different from my solar in Lord Tyrion's rooms, Sansa thought. It's only a little bigger than Ellaria's. Then she thought how stupid that was. It was just a solar, what shocking decadence had she expected? There was the little balcony that looked down into the gardens, and fine orange silk curtains, and a writing desk, and other perfectly ordinary furnishings. Oh, she must be careful. Better that she should say little enough for them to think her slow-witted than that she should say something to offend them. I only forget myself in my lady's presence, the prince said, and Ellaria rolled her eyes and took up the flagon of wine to pour, a smile still playing at the corner of her mouth. As Ellaria was filling Sansa's glass, Oberyn turned his dark gaze on her for the first time since last night, and Sansa felt her heart leap to her throat. Say something, she thought. Say something, or he'll send you back. I do not know how to thank you, my prince, she said. Good, that is a good start. Do not trouble yourself, the prince said, taking up his cup. He did not drink, though, only stared into its depths. He set it down, took a deep breath, and looked up at her again. He spoke his next as calmly as if he were asking how she liked the gardens, but his smile was gone. If anything, you ought to curse me for not taking you away from there sooner. Me, and every other man in this city. What could she possibly say to that? Her mind was blank, until Joff's stupid sneering face appeared in it, and, dropping her eyes to her hands, clasped in her lap, she echoed what they had told her in the keep. I have been treated more kindly than I had any right to expect in light of my family's treasons. Gods be good, the prince murmured, and when she chanced to look up, she saw naked disbelief on his face. She looked back down at her hands, trying to blink away the hot prickling behind her eyes. What did he expect her to say? What did he want her to say? It was Lady Elaria who helped her, pushing her cup closer to her. Drink, my lady, she said gently. My prince's anger is not for you, do not think that for a moment. With her. Prince Oberyn repeated, and as Sansa took a sip from her cup, watered wine, with a bit of juice, the same as at breakfast, but with a little more wine this time, he blinked at his lady as if he had never heard something so ridiculous in his life. 7 hells, I should think not. What else is she to think, my dear, she asked, a little sharply, and then saw how Sansa flinched a little, and sighed. Forgive me, my lady. We are neither of us wroth with you, you have my word. No indeed, Oberyn said, and took up his cup to drink at last. When he set it back down, he sighed, and rubbed his face with his free hand before meeting her eyes once again. My lady, I must tell you that of the two of us, my brother has all the skill with words. I ought to speak you more delicately, but when I try to think of gentler ways to say some of the necessary things, ask the necessary questions, I fear that I find myself too quickly filled with anger at what little I know you have endured to go softly as I ought. Allow me to begin with this. You entrusted yourself to my care last night when I told you that I hate the Lannisters. You owe me nothing, least of all gratitude, for taking you from them. I think I know only the smallest part of what you have been made to bear at their hands, and that is enough to make me deeply ashamed that I did not carry you away from them the moment I arrived in this thrice-damned city. It was a trap, it must be, he was too kind, he was too good, he understood too much. But stupid, stupid little girl that she was, some new awakened thing in Sansa's heart let out a howl of rage and joy. You have done more than anyone else, burst out of her, and the creature in her heart was so fierce and giddy with its waking that she hardly cared, anymore, if this was a trap. Perhaps I am stupid, but Joff was even stupider, the creature in her heart seemed to say, he was much too stupid to come up with any trap this elaborate, and no one who isn't cares about me enough to do it. It was a wolf, she thought wildly, a fierce wolf that she thought they'd killed, that they thought they'd killed, but maybe she had only been curled up, sleeping, until the moment he looked in her eyes in the Godswood and told her he hated them, too. The wolf in her heart made it easier to bear, as they spoke. She told him what she could, though that was little enough, in truth. He had worked it out about the hairnet, of course, and he said that it was a poison called the Strangler. Even rarer than true black amethysts, he said, with a flash of his smile. If you had used it to pay your way, they could have taken you to Ash High and back, and in great luxury, besides. Would you like to go to Ash High? Perhaps, she said softly, but she managed to meet his smile with one of her own. Maybe it was the wine that made her so brave, watered or not, she was well into her 3rd cup by now. He gave a low chuckle. I could see you were a brave maid already. I confess, I have always wanted to see Ash High myself. Gazing down at the hairnet again, he returned to the subject at hand. Elaria noticed that you had lost an amethyst when we first went in for the feast, he said. I expect your maid would have noticed and remarked upon it if one was already missing while she dressed your hair, unless, of course, it was she who took it. One of my maids wanted to go, Sansa recalled suddenly. Shay. But she said that she would stay below the salt, she only wanted to see the festivities. Oh. Oberyn only looked curious. And what did you say to her? I didn't know what to say, Sansa admitted. I thought there might not be any harm in it, but before I could say anything, Lord Tyrion told her no. Did he, now? Oberyn frowned. That is most interesting. You said her name was Shay. Yes. But, she can be a little sullen sometimes, but I do not think there is any harm in her, not truly. She only wanted to see the pigeons fly out of the pie, she finished lamely. Oberyn smiled a little, distractedly. Be at ease, my lady, he said. Most like she was only a sometimes sullen maid who wished to see the pigeons. We shall question her to be sure. Do you recall, was there anyone else who touched your hair after your maid was finished with it? Did the imp remark upon it, or? She shook her head. Tyrion had said some things about how fine she looked, as he often did, but even if he could have reached her hair, he had not tried to touch her since their wedding, save to take her arm as they walked into some function or other. But, someone had said something, it seemed to her, had reached out, no. Well, Lady Olenna Tyrell said that the wind had been at my hair, and went to fix it, but, no, she gasped, seeing the way Oberyn's eyebrows went up. You cannot think. He snorted. I can think a great deal of that one, I promise you. She will have heard the rumors about Joffrey, same as we had in Dorne, and seen him for herself when she came. Oh, no, Sansa thought, remembering anew the day that Margaery had first summoned her. She had tried not to think on it too much since then, it was too painful, knowing how they had all turned away from her after her wedding. But now. She whispered, and she tried to explain about when she had met Margaery for the first time, and her grandmother. She had heard things, and she asked me, and I said it was true. I said he was a monster, and she said they would see to it. I thought they only meant to break the engagement, and I was frightened, because it would mean I would have to marry him again, but she meant this, didn't she? I expect so, Oberyn said, but he did not look half so troubled as she felt. He only seemed to be thinking about it all, trying to work it out, as he had before. She felt, she did not know how to feel, she thought she might be sick, but a part of her felt almost proud, and that made her feel even sicker. As if she knew, Lady Ellaria, who had been quiet, spoke up then. This was not your fault, she said, taking Sansa's hand in her own. But I told them, I wanted him to die, and then he did, because I told them. No, Oberyn said, quietly but firmly. Someone would have told them. We had heard things all the way off in Sunspear, long before I set out for King's Landing. When Myrcella first arrived, my brother bade me watch her for any signs of such cruelty as we had heard her brother possessed. I promise you, if the Tyrells had not made up their minds already, they would have done soon enough, with your word or someone else's. But it wasn't someone else's word, Sansa said. It was mine, and they used me to do it besides, and now they think it was Tyrion, and it was me. Joffrey killed himself, Oberyn said grimly. You were quite right, he was a monster, and someone would have slain him in the end. Indeed, I am sorry that I was not the one to do it, but I was too concerned with another of Tywin Lannister's monsters to deal with the one who sat the Iron Throne. There was silence at the table for a few moments, and then, at last, Sansa whispered, I wish I had known. I would have done it, if they'd asked. Perhaps I'm a monster, too. No, the prince said, fiercely, and Ellaria squeezed her hand again. She was not certain whether she believed him, but her head was too full for her to argue, at least for now. My Lady Ellaria said at last, there is one other matter. I told you, she looked over at Oberyn fondly, and he gave a distracted smile back, that my prince sat watch outside your door while you slept. Sansa remembered, and flushed. Of course, she said. Forgive me, I ought to have thanked you before. Oh, my dear, Ellaria said, no, that is not what I meant. There was such sorrow in her voice as she spoke that it only made Sansa sorrier, and she tried once more to apologize, and finally, Oberyn cut in. My lady wishes to tell you why, he said. His voice was low, his words for the three of them only, though of course there was no one else in the room, and the doors were all closed, and evening starting to fall outside the window. His eyes were far away, she noticed, as he continued in that low voice. He took Ellaria's free hand in his own, and Sansa saw, with a start, that his hand shook, just a little. She might have thought she'd imagined it, except that Ellaria raised it to her lips, as he had done with her hand earlier, and then turned her gaze back to Sansa. Zia came to speak with us last night, she said. She was worried for you. Worried? Sansa tried to remember what she might have said, or done, to make the maid worry. It had only been hours before, not yet a full day, but sometimes everything seemed clear and sharp as broken glass, and sometimes it seemed a blur, as if it had happened years ago. She was very kind to me. I was overwhelmed, but, I'm sorry, my lady, I can't recall. I'm very sorry to have frightened her. She saw that you seemed quite strong, Elaria said. That was why she did not say anything, but, while you were undressing, my lady, she caught a glimpse of your back, and... Oh, Sansa said, understanding, with a feeling like a brick in her belly. They would have learned it eventually, she thought, but that did not make her feel any better. I am still quite healthy, my lady, she said. The Maester said they will fade with time, a little. In fact, Maester Pycelle had said that they might fade, and then only some. She had not much cared after they married her to Tyrion. He, at least, did not seem to mind her disfigurement, and no one besides him and a few servants would ever see them. Oberyn only waved her words away, shaking his head. There are many who find scars quite attractive, he said, with a smile, but it did not reach his eyes, and his words did not really sound like the jest he seemed to mean them. Elaria sighed at him. My lady, she said, more gently still, we only feared for what pains they might give you. You seem strong enough, to be sure, but is there aught you need for them? Would you like for a Maester to see to them? She thought she had been shocked before, when she had told them about the Queen of Thorns, but this, she could not speak for some moments, and she realized suddenly that she was gaping at them. They are old, my lady, she said at last, stupidly. Yes, Elaria said, with a queer little twist of her mouth. Zia said none were fresh, which was a relief, elsewise, I assure you, we would have summoned a Maester immediately. I am glad they were not, for your sake, but, I suppose I wish we might have been here sooner, that we might have done something. Lady Stark, Oberyn said, his voice so strangely quiet and steady, though she saw how he gripped his lady's hand. I will leave, if it would be easier to speak of with another woman, but we would know. You needn't, she said, before she had really thought about it. It would be rude, she thought, but truth be told, that was not it. Whatever I tell Elaria, he will hear of it eventually. That was true, but still, that was not really it, either. I am not afraid, she said. And it was true. Lady could always tell when she should be afraid. Before Sansa had even laid eyes on Sir Eilin's face, Lady had known that she should be afraid. And when she knew she shouldn't, she was as sweet as any dog could ever be, sniffing and then pricking her ears up and wagging her tail. And so, too, the wolf in Sansa's heart, the one that they had woken, had decided to trust them, that wild part of her, and she wasn't afraid, she really wasn't. She was not brave, not really, but she wasn't afraid of them, at least. I only remember a little, really. But it was, after battles, and things, later. Oxcross, that was the worst of it, that was the first in the Great Hall, before the court, and after that. She meant that to be reassuring. The beatings were for littler things before that, and he would get bored quickly, and it was only the two of them and whichever Kingsguard he wanted to do it. Maybe a few others, if they were in the yard, or somewhere else in the castle. The Great Hall was the worst, but Lord Tyrion had stopped it, and Joff had not dared to do it again after that. That was all she meant to tell them. But Elaria, bright and warm and, for everything she said about being a silly hen, unflappable, Elaria had gasped when she mentioned the Great Hall, and the hand in which she still held one of Sansa's tightened so that Sansa hissed a little. It was surprise, more than real pain, but Elaria's eyes went wide, and she let go of Sansa's hand altogether, looking sadder than Sansa would have guessed she could. She murmured something in apology, and Sansa meant to tell her no, it was her fault. She could tell it was, even if she wasn't sure exactly how, and she noticed vaguely, from the corner of her eye, how Elaria and Oberyn's hands, still intertwined, went white at the knuckles. The Great Hall? Oberyn asked, before she could apologize for whatever it was she had said to upset Elaria so. His voice was quieter than ever, so she could not be sure, but she thought it shook a little. The Great Hall, he repeated, as if he did not think he had heard her correctly. With the court about him. About you. The way he said it, then, Sansa felt her face go red, and she looked down at her lap, where her empty hands were clasped. Yes, she said, and then, because she did not know how long this strange courage would last, she said, as quickly as she could, while trying to keep her voice from shaking too much, Yes, but only the once there. Lord Tyrion came upon us and put a stop to it, and after that, Joff never did it again. When my father first died, for her voice quavered then, he had them hit me on my face, a few times, but I did not learn fast enough to say what he liked, I suppose, and he. She ran out of breath, but neither of them spoke, and she said, at last, he liked me pretty. Silence greeted her. Looking up, she saw that Ellaria had closed her eyes. She was turned away, but Sansa could still see that her eyes were closed, and she could not miss the way her shoulders heaved as she drew a long, shaky breath. Oberyn's dark eyes were still on her, though, and at last, he let go of Ellaria's hand and rose from the table to stride over to his balcony again. She could see the tension in his back. Sansa did not know what she ought to say, what she ought to tell them. She had tried to tell them not to trouble themselves. It wasn't as if it hurt anymore, and Joff was dead, and they had promised she was safe here. At last, Ellaria looked back at Sansa. Her eyes were bright, but she did not seem to be weeping, at least. She took both of Sansa's hands in hers, but careful, barely holding on to them, as if she feared she might hurt her, and she only stared down at them for several moments, running her thumbs over the hills of Sansa's knuckles. At last, she took another breath, this one steadier, and looked back up. You said that Lord Tyrion put a stop to it, she said. Sansa nodded, but Ellaria did not let go of her hands just yet. Yes, she said. He yelled at Joff, and took me to the Tower of the Hand, and had a maester see to me. He was angry, then, asked Oberyn. His voice was very quiet, and yet Sansa could hear every word. The imp. He was angry. Yes, Sansa said. He said that he did not intend for the marriage to go ahead after that. Later, before the battle, he said that perhaps he should have sent me to Dorne with Myrcella. Ellaria smiled at that, looking up, and Oberyn gave a strange, strangled sound that she realized, as he turned back, was a laugh. He might have saved us all a good deal of trouble, he said, as he approached the table again. You most of all, to be sure, but Doran would have been delighted, pretty little brides for both of his sons. The little snort Ellaria gave began to put Sansa back at her ease, at least a little. Somehow, my love, I do not think Prince Doran's son is the husband Lady Sansa would have found in Dorne. Sansa was not certain what she meant by that, but it made Oberyn chuckle, a true laugh this time, if a weak one. He sat back down at last, but he did not speak just yet. He only looked into her eyes for a moment, and then at Ellaria, who looked back at him and drew in a deep breath. This is a harder question, my lady, she said. You must forgive me for it, but, perhaps it will be easier from me than a stranger, a maester or a septa. There were rumors about Lord Tyrion, and it seems that he was kind to you. He was, Sansa said. There were the looks he gave her sometimes, the hungry, sad ones, but if those were the hardest thing she had endured in the Red Keep, she should have counted herself lucky. He wouldn't let Joff beat me, and he never struck me. He hardly touched me at all. That was best. It had been lonely, haunting his tower and pretending to see to things like meals, while knowing she really had nothing to do with them. Lonely and boring. But that was better than what her life in the keep had been before she was married, and with Dontos's promise to carry in her heart, knowing that she would go home soon, she could bear it easily enough. Yes, Lady Ellaria said, nodding. That is what we had heard. But, my lady. She took another deep breath, and it trembled a little. Was there anything else that was done to you? Were you hurt, let us say, in ways beyond the beatings? Sansa did not understand what she meant at first, did not know how to begin answering such a question. I have never known a day without fear. But that could not be what they meant. They couldn't be concerned with something so silly as her stupid heart, with its fears and aches. I don't. Then she saw how Oberyn had covered his eyes with one of his hands, how tense he seemed. She saw the fear in Lady Sand's eyes, recalled how the prince had offered to leave them, and suddenly she understood. Oh, she said, her cheeks flaring red. No, my lady. I am still a maid, she managed, in barely a whisper. She said a little prayer of thanks to the gods for it. Sansa did not think, really, that they would turn her out if she were not a maid, not with what she knew of the prince, what Lady Sand had said about how he had done all of this for his family's sake as well as her own. But at least this way she had something more to offer them, if her husband were to be found guilty. Prince Oberyn's shoulders lowered a little at that, and he looked back at her, and gave her a little smile, so sad that she hardly recognized it as such. "Well," he said, "I am glad that you were spared something, at least." She could not have said what made her do it. The wine, most likely. But suddenly, she was seized by a strange surge of gratitude, she supposed, or something like it. Whatever it was, it made her brave, and, taking one of her hands out of Elariah's, she reached out for him. Her courage faltered before she could do more than brush his fingertips with her own, but he caught her hand. Looking back up, she thought that something in his face was at least a little softer. He asked her a few more things, but as evening was starting to fall around them, Sir Demon Sand came with a message from the Red Keep. Oberyn looked at it, but only nodded and thanked his squire. "It is no more than I expected," he said dismissively. "Lord Tywine bids an audience with me come morning, and Mace Tyrell as well. I shall see to having some of your things brought from the keep whilst I am there, my lady." Her fear returned then, though it was not so powerful as it had been last night, at least. "My prince," she said, "I am quite well provided for here. Lady Elariah has ordered that some of her gowns should be let out. I beg you not to." But he was already waving her protest away. "On the contrary, I beg you will not trouble yourself on my account. To be sure, the Lannisters will find it most irksome, but you are quite safe here, and they cannot lay hands on me without. I confess, I will take no small pleasure in needling them so." There was a look of satisfaction in his eyes as he refilled all their glasses. "It is the very least of what I owe them." Doran. The message, Doran was informed, arrived in Sunspear not long after dawn, and when it was seen to be in his brother's hand, it was sent on to the Water Gardens with all due haste. He was only wakened a little earlier than was his wont. In truth, he did not sleep well without milk of the poppy or dream wine, but he could not afford to spend too many nights entirely insensible, nor the time it took him to regather his wits the morning after taking such. "I write this near a day after it happened, and I will not flatter myself that I have beaten your friends in this wretched city to delivering the news," his brother began. "You will forgive me, I hope, and in apology, I can at least offer some parts of the story that, I believe, even you will not have heard yet." The letter was short, for that promise. Doran took this as an even more intriguing sign, that Oberyn would not risk the full story falling into someone else's hands. What little his brother told him was interesting enough. The very first of the ravens, bearing news of the king's death and the imp's arrest last week, had indeed arrived already, as Oberyn guessed. The very first of the messages had reached him near 3 days past. But this of a direwolf in the Red Keep Scotswood, who is now comfortably settled in mine own household, now that was interesting. So far as anyone in King's Landing had known, at least when the first of the ravens went forth, Sansa Stark had vanished. So, one of his sources had mentioned, had a fool, but Oberyn made no mention of collecting him from the Godswood, too. Likely the fellow had just been trampled in the crowd, as the earlier message had said, or stumbled, drunk, into the black water and drowned. But, as he recalled from last year's letters, the man only lived because of Sansa Stark's intercession with the king on his behalf. An interesting coincidence, at the very least. Doran was not particularly surprised by Oberyn's mention of the lady's scars, more disappointed, perhaps. Hints had reached him here, to be sure, but Tywine Lannister's children, at least, did not seem to indulge in terror and torment purely for sport, for other reasons aplenty, certainly, but not simply for the fun of it, and the one of his grandchildren with whom Doran was acquainted was a bright, open-hearted little creature. One would think he knew better than to give any Lannister the benefit of the doubt, though. Perhaps he had seized too quickly on Myrcilla's sweet nature as a sign that there was reason for some hope. For myself, his brother wrote, I would have the lady on the next ship to Sunspear, but there are none for 3 days yet, and by that time, I suspect it will be a trick to get her to it unremarked. That excuse, Doran did not think much of, in truth. Oh, certainly, his brother was not known for discretion, but that was largely by his own doing, that no one could imagine him doing things in stealth made doing them that much simpler. If he were determined, he would get the lady onto any ship he pleased, even if he had to roll her up in a carpet. He was not therefore surprised to see that Oberyn went on. Besides, there are few I would trust to deliver her safely, most of those still in Dorne, I told you I ought to bring a few of my daughters with me, and, as I have just been informed I am to serve as one of the Imp's judges, alongside Mace Tyrell and Tywine Lannister, I shall not be able to do the job myself till after the business is over. As well, though there was no real love between them, the lady believes in her lord husband's innocence, and wishes to do what she might to see him freed. These excuses, now, those surprised Doran, and he mulled them over as he wheeled his chair out to his accustomed place on the terrace. Oh, this of not trusting anyone to deliver her was part of it rang true enough, but there were Sir Daemon and Ellaria, at least, and Doran was certain that no few of the lords and ladies in his brother's party would have been honored by the task. No, for all that it came at the end of them, his desire to honor the young lady's own wishes seemed to be the deciding factor. Coupled with his determination that none but himself should see her to Dorne, why, they almost seemed to speak of an unexpected depth of feeling. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, Doran smiled at his own fancy. Still, it was an intriguing notion, and stranger things had happened than his brother taking it into his head to play the gallant for a fair maiden. What little of Sansa Stark's version of the tale Oberyn trusted to reach him raised more questions than it answered, of course. But that was more than enough for things to begin taking shape in his mind, not plans, nothing so certain as that yet. Notions, though, oh, yes, he had several of those. As the children began to trickle in and the early morning noise of birds and fountains gave way to laughter, Doran watched for a little golden head, with a white cloak close by. He had bidden his daughter send Myrcella here 2 days past, feeling that he should tell her of her brother's death himself. She had borne it like a queen, without a single tear that he could see. She seemed more distressed to learn that her uncle was accused, but even then, she remained confident that he would be fine. Uncle Tyrion slapped Joff once, and Joff hated him, but he would never kill him, she had told him, firmly. When he had asked that Oberyn and Ellaria watch the child, on her arrival in Dorne, for any sign of something like what he had heard of her brother, they had nothing but good to say of her, except for one incident, one little thing that unsettled Ellaria and that she could not put aside, and Oberyn had therefore advised her to send on to Doran. She misses her uncle and her mother, but mostly she seems troubled over her little brother, Ellaria wrote. She misses him, but she says, too, that she worries for him. This in itself is only a sign of her good heart, but she said, also, that she was glad when Joffrey became king, because his own rooms were so far away from Tommen's, now. She did not say more than that when I asked her, and seemed more distressed than I have seen her in all her time here, so far from her home and family. It is a little thing, I know, and I expect, or, perhaps, I only hope, that I am making too much of it, but some motherly part of me would not let me forget it. He spotted her now, sitting on the edge of one of the pools. She seemed to be gazing at her feet, which dangled in the water. He could not see if she wept. After he considered his brother's letter a little longer, he at last bade Ario send someone to fetch Myrcella, that he might speak with her. She came before him directly, and he saw that though her face was solemn, her eyes were dry. "Good morning, Prince Doran," she said, curtsying prettily. "I hope you are well today." "I might say the same to you, Princess," he said, unable to help a little smile, bowing his head in return. He gestured to the little table laid out for him. He had little appetite these days, but liked to have some small things nearby, a bit of cheese and flatbread or a bowl of grapes. "Would you like something?" "No thank you," she said. "I have already broken my fast." "I have had a letter," he said, holding up the folded paper. "From my brother, in King's Landing, and I hope you might be able to help me understand a little more of the things he tells me. I beg you, my princess, before you left King's Landing, were you acquainted at all with Lady Sansa Stark?" She did not smile, but her emerald eye seemed to lighten. "Lady Sansa is very beautiful as Mother and Princess Arianne." Myrcella, from what he had seen and heard, was rather in awe of his daughter, near as much as his elder nieces. He had hoped that might bring her to the water gardens more often, to accompany the little princess, but... well, that was another matter, and Myrcella had more to tell him yet. "She's also very kind. Mother said she had traitor's blood, Joff said so too," she said, as an afterthought, "and I guess that was true, but I don't know how she could have been a traitor herself. Joff said her father tried to give his throne to one of father's brothers, but it's not as if she had anything to do with that. Her brother did treason, when he said he was a king, but he was all the way in the north and she was in King's Landing, so I don't see how that was her fault, either, do you? A very good point, Doran said. She saw Joffrey cry, though, when his arm got hurt on the trident. Myrcella said, thoughtfully. He said he hated her for it, after the Maester saw to his wounds, and I asked if he still meant to marry her, then, and he said I was as stupid as she was, which he usually just said when he was being awful. Oh, she said, suddenly, her face falling. I'm sorry, my prince. I shouldn't have said that, now that he's dead. It's not polite to say such things about dead people. It's quite all right, he told her. Sometimes I forget myself, and say something of how annoying my little sister was, running after me with my brother, the two of them leaving eggs in my boots or throwing me into one of the pools, and it's many years since she died. Gently drawing her back to the subject at hand, he said, you said that your brother hated Lady Stark. Yes, and I can't imagine why. Just because she saw him cry. She was always kind, though, and she was the one who went to find help for him, besides. If she hadn't been to see, who knows what might have happened to him. A lizard lion might have eaten him before anyone found him. It did not escape him that Myrcella sounded more indignant on Sansa's behalf than distressed by the prospect of a lizard lion devouring her brother. He could not blame her. Indeed, Doran murmured. Do you know how Lady Stark felt about him? She said she loved him, and she was always happy to be with him, at least before her lord father died. Then she always seemed sad. It was very sad when my father the king died, too, but I don't think I was as sad as she was. But, then, she saw him die, and that would be much more horrid, wouldn't it? Not for the first time, Doran said a silent prayer to the mother and father above that his son would one day have a wife with such good sense, and such a good heart besides. To Myrcella, however, he only offered another quiet agreement. Myrcella nodded, and seemed to need a moment to consider this all a little more, which he was quite happy to give to her. At last, she continued. Even though she was sad, though, she was still very kind to Tommen and me. Before I left, my uncle Tyrion said to mother that perhaps they ought to send her with me to Dorne. I should have liked that very much. She was still supposed to marry Joffrey then, and I was glad that she was going to be my sister, but I was sorry to leave her. Now she's married to my favorite of all my uncles, so she's my aunt, and that's nice too. But she's still all the way off in King's Landing. It's much nicer here, I think. Uncle Tyrion is funny, though, and very kind, so perhaps she's happier now that they're married. But if she had come with me, then when Joffrey married Margaery, she could have married Tristan's brother, so then she'd be my sister, and she'd be here, and that would be best of all. Is Prince Quentyn as nice as Tristan and Princess Arianne are? He is, Doran said, smiling again. She's not nearly as old as my uncle, though, he's very old. Myrcella said thoughtfully, and Doran, who had been a man grown when Tyrion Lannister was born, struggled not to laugh. If he dies before her, perhaps she could still marry your other son. Perhaps, Doran agreed. He did not mention that, depending on how the trial went, Lady Stark might be a widow much sooner than Myrcella seemed to think, to say nothing of his elder son's current task to find a bride. Who knew? Young as she was, and sheltered from the worst of life, Myrcella had nonetheless shown herself to be a good judge of character. He did not know Sansa Stark, but she had impressed his brother well enough, so she must be at least passing clever. If both she and Lady Stark were convinced of the imp's innocence, well, then, perhaps he was innocent, and could be proven so besides. As I said, you know, I have had a letter from Prince Oberyn. That's why I wished to ask you about Sansa Stark. You see, my brother found her after the wedding feast. With your uncle, her husband, arrested, my brother was not sure what might become of her, so she is now established in his own household in King's Landing, rather than staying at the Red Keep. The mention of her uncle's arrest did not seem to trouble her, he envied her faith in the justice of the world. Besides, Myrcella seemed genuinely delighted by the news of Sansa Stark's current whereabouts, her eyes shone, and she gave him a true smile. Oh, how lovely. Prince Oberyn and Lady Sand were very kind to me. They'll be kind to her, too, won't they? They will, Doran confirmed, smiling. You have my word on that. She has not been there long, of course, but he tells me that they are already quite fond of her. I am still thinking on what my reply to my brother will be, but I thought perhaps you might like to write a short note to Lady Sangza, to send along with it. Yes, Myrcella said. What a good idea. Do you think she will be able to come to Dawn? Her and Uncle Tyrion? I don't know yet, but from what you have told me, I would very much like to meet her. Yes, you'll like her, Myrcella said, quite decidedly. So will Tristan. Does Prince Oberyn have a singer? Lady Sangza likes music. I do not believe he does, but I shall certainly tell him of your advice on that score, Doran promised. She nodded, and told him a little more about Lady Sangza, including one very interesting story of her brother's name Adatoni, when her uncle had first returned to King's Landing. It seemed that Tommen had fallen from his pony. Myrcella herself had run to her little brother to see to him, and she thought that Lady Sangza wanted to do the same, but the king had not given her leave. Then she told him he ought to tell Tommen how well he rode. And he did, even if he did fall off. Everyone falls off now and again, don't they? And then he got back on and rode again, and that was very brave of him. Even the hound said so. A few more such tales, and then she begged his leave to go, and write her note. He still was not quite certain what he would tell his brother, but he supposed that did not really matter, Oberyn would do what he would, whatever Doran told him. In truth, too, he trusted his brother, he would never have sent him to King's Landing if he could not rely upon him. Certainly, they had not prepared for something like this, but still, he thought that Oberyn, with Ellaria to steady him, had a decent chance of coming out with something like success. In the end, he dashed off only a few lines of his own, and these were not particularly specific, in truth. He mentioned the fool, only one of our friends in King's Landing mentioned his disappearance, and then with apologies, as it was likely nothing, but it sounds worth pursuing, if you can find him, and what other general pieces of advice he could come up with, knowing as little as he did, and being, at best, near a week's raven flight away. He added the little princess's note when she gave it to him solemnly, after he promised that he would not peek. It is terribly impolite to read a lady's correspondence, she informed him. She was quite right, he told her, and gave his word that he would not do so. Then it was all done, and not even time for supper. As he lay in his bed that night, trying in vain to find sleep, he reflected that he did not know if he had ever anticipated news from King's Landing before. It was a curious thing indeed. Chapter 4. Chapter text. Ellaria. At some point in his preparations and investigations, her prince engaged a dressmaker, who arrived on the 5th day after the wedding feast. Sangza did not seem particularly happy to learn that she was to have new clothes, indeed, she seemed quite shaken. She managed to endure several measurements, and a little discussion of what might suit, but she did not say much to start with, and only grew more silent as the conversation continued. Ellaria, beginning to be practiced in reading her moods, realized that she was near to panicking, and cut the business short, escorting her into the garden. Oberyn had followed when he caught Ellaria's eye from his solar, but before Sangza could notice him approaching on the path, she shook her head, and, thank the gods, he kept his silence, falling back a little and settling on a bench across the little clearing from the edge of the fountain where the ladies sat. Sangza did not seem to fear Oberyn, really, but they had found that coaxing things out of her came more easily together, with Ellaria leading. Perhaps because she was a woman, or because she was a bastard, or, as Ellaria had told Oberyn when they fell asleep one evening, perhaps Sangza found her more calming simply because she knew how to sit still for more than half a minute at a time. That Oberyn responded, is only because she has never seen you after love-making. She hit him with a pillow in answer, and then he pulled her atop him, and they proceeded to spend the next quarter hour quite merrily indeed. Ellaria called for wine for all of them, as much to give Oberyn something to do rather than sit and watch as from any thirst. It gave him an excuse, besides, to press a cup into Sangza's hands, and to linger at least a little, his fingers on hers. At last, she dared a look up, and he gave her a soft smile before giving the other cup he held to Ellaria and retreating graciously. "I'm sorry, my lady," my prince, Sangza said. She was looking down at her cup, which was just as well, so she could not see how Oberyn grimaced at the courtesies. They saddened Ellaria to hear too, having seen how Sangza fell behind them when feeling frightened or grieved, but she was always better at schooling her face than her prince. Still, Sangza did not tense too much, or pull away, when Ellaria put an arm around her shoulders. "No apologies are necessary, for either of us, she murmured, and, before she realized what she was doing, she pressed a soft kiss to Sangza's temple. Sangza said nothing for a long moment, but she did not pull away, either, and finally, Elaria thought she felt her relax, just the tiniest bit. That did her more good than anything else might have, reassured her more than any words. She feared that doing it again might be too much, though, and took a sip of her wine instead, contented herself with tightening the arm around her shoulders just a little, just enough, she hoped, to reassure her. "I beg your pardon, my lady," she whispered, so low that she did not think even Oberyn would hear over the noise of the fountain. "Heavens, my prince will be jealous now. As if it weren't enough that I made you laugh before he did, now I'm the first to kiss you." It was a risky thing to say, and if this were even a few days ago she wouldn't have said something with such a risk of shocking her, but she wouldn't have risked the kiss then, either. She was rewarded when Sangza burst out laughing, a pure, sweet sound, and if she sniffled a little at the end of it, none of them said anything. Elaria caught a glimpse of Oberyn's face, and nearly started laughing herself, even as her heart swelled with affection. The mingled relief, and pleasure, not to mention the lingering concern and sorrow, made him look every bit the besotted fool. "If I did not know him better, I'd imagine he'd be happy to see that Tyrion Lannister loses his head, innocence be damned, so long as Sansa is widowed," she thought, and gave him a fond smile before turning her attention back to the maiden herself. "Truly," Sansa said, after a long drink of wine, it's silly. I'm sorry. It's been so long since I had a new dress, except..." She broke off again, and took a deep breath. Elaria said nothing, only waited for her to gather herself. "One day, weeks ago, the Queen said I was to have a new gown. It was stupid. I should have realized, it wasn't until the day it was finished that was the day she made me, and I was too stupid to figure it out until she brought out the maiden's cloak and took me to the September she finished," and Elaria sighed with sudden understanding. After that, the first new gown I had was the one I wore to the feast," she added. Elaria said. "Yes, my dear, those seem to me very good reasons to be a little nervous of the sudden appearance of dressmakers. I haven't anything to pay you back with," Sansa said in a sudden rush, her face red. I'm sorry," she said immediately after. I know if you meant to, if you expected, I know that it's only your own great generosity, I do, truly, and I pray you will forgive me, but stark pride runs deep," Oberyn said. His voice was soft, and Elaria knew he was not insulted, which, she supposed, was why Sansa was so hesitant to explain this second reason for her fearfulness. But Sansa did not know him so well, and did not have time to hide the apprehension on her face when she looked up again. Elaria tried to reassure her without speaking, briefly tightening the arm about her shoulders again, just a little. Thankfully, Oberyn smiled, and continued. "Near as deep as Martell pride, I think." "Unbowed, unbent, unbroken," Sansa murmured. "You didn't bend the knee. That's why you're still princes, not lords, like the Starks. Stories of your wedding reached us in Dorne. You did not bend the knee, either, as I recall." Sansa ducked her head again, and spots of pink appeared on her cheeks. Oberyn continued, pointing out, "And, too, some would say you are a princess. Indeed, by Dornish law, they might even say that you are the queen in the north." Sansa paled a little at that, and took a nervous sip from her cup. Elaria hugged her a little closer to reassure her. Mercifully, Oberyn understood Elaria's look, and did not press her further. "'Tis no treason to say such things," Elaria said gently, suspecting she knew the shape of Sansa's fear. "My prince only remarks on what might, theoretically, by some reckoning, be true. There is no treason in saying that it might rain tomorrow, is there?" I suppose not," Sansa said carefully. Nor, Oberyn put in, his voice only loud enough for them to hear him, and then only because he leaned in towards them, in saying that some theoretical Dornish persons might have less interest in what the Lannisters consider treason than the Lannisters have convinced themselves they have. "At any rate," Elaria said, not wanting to dwell on this for the nonce, the lady had been upset enough without adding another fear on top, to say nothing of this perhaps not being the place to discuss even what little she knew of the prince's plans. "My lady, I quite understand your reaction, and I apologize. We should at least have given you more warning. If you prefer, Zia and I can find a few new girls for the work, and simply order the fabrics ourselves." "Zia, or one of the other girls, can take your measurements well enough. No, Sangza said, and Elaria was pleased to see that some color had returned to her face. Her muscles beneath Elaria's fingers did not feel quite so tense as they had. No, I thank you, I thank you, she said, and Elaria smiled, and pressed her shoulder once more. I was only startled. Please forgive me, it was rude of me to suggest that you. It was no such thing, Oberyn said, quietly, but firmly. At once, he was every bit the prince, and every bit the sweet, warm man she loved. You have learned, at great pain to yourself, over the course of 2 years, to search every apple for a worm. That is not a habit unlearned in a week. Your fear is no crime, the crime is that you were taught it. Elaria wanted very much to kiss him then. But she would not leave Sangza, and she did not think Oberyn would thank her for doing so, either, so she contented herself with smiling at him, and hoping that he could read her love in the look. Oberyn. Tonight would make 7 days since Joffrey Baratheon's death. Oberyn had kept busy, trying quietly to find some word of the fool Dontos, hashing out the business of the trial with Mace Oberyn and Tywin Lannister, and, very carefully, letting word of Lady Stark's place as an honored guest in his household trickle out among such of the Martell's bannermen who had accompanied him to the city, along with word of his vow to her, and the scars she bore which had only steeled him in his resolution. Oh, he had not kept it a secret that he had her. Answering that very first summons the second morning after the wedding, when Tywin Lannister said that the girl had vanished, Oberyn had been more than happy to correct him, and inform him that she was in Martell keeping. He did not offer much more detail, pointing out only that, his sister having been spurned for a Stark lady, House Martell had as much right to any Stark hostage as House Lannister. To be sure, there was no small pleasure in thumbing his nose at the Lannisters, and if they assumed that the lady would be as ill-treated under his roof as she had been under theirs, that said more of them than him. And it was likely safer, in the earliest days at least, to simply let them assume that she was more prisoner than guest. Still, though, it chafed at him. No, more than that. It shamed him. Elaria comforted him well enough, but when, the day after claiming her as hostage, he had mused that perhaps he ought to confess it to Sangza, she had grown almost sharp with him. It would be for your sake, lightening your own burden by adding to hers. However much you might assure her that we do not see it that way, you will put the thought into her head, and that will undo all we have accomplished in putting her at her ease, which is little enough. She was right, of course, but the deception still rankled. Fortunately, he did not have to bear it long before a solution presented itself. The next morning, he passed by the house's baths on his way to the stable. He could hear splashing, and voices, Zia's and Elaria's and Lady Sangza's, and a few others besides, one of Sir Daemon's Illyrian half-sisters, he thought, and another maid or two, and when he realized they were singing, he lingered just a little. He could not make out the exact words, but he knew the tune, and realized that the other women were teaching Sangza some Rohinish children's song the orphans had brought with them, about a mischievous young turtle. It was a favorite in the gardens for its wordplay, the way it tricked and tripped and tickled the tongue, and, of course, for the great splash at the end, as the fish the little turtle saved flopped out of the cruel fisherman's boat and back into the water. In the gardens, it was customary to mark the fish's escape with a leap into the pools, making, of course, as great a splash as possible, but when their daughters were babes, Elaria had contented herself with slapping the water in the bath. He supposed, since there was no flood beneath the door, that was what she had done here, too, and then all of them collapsed into giggles. He nearly lost his breath when he heard Lady Sangza's laughter, and though he had heard it so rarely, somehow, he knew which of all the voices was hers, just as he did Elaria's, for something wrung at his heart at the sound, and he listened, entranced, as they led her through the song again. Eventually, he thought, she has a good memory for it, already, she's near as sure of it as ladies who've sung this since childhood, and she's only heard it 2, 3, it was then that he realized they had gone through it twice more while he lingered, or struck. If he didn't get to the stables soon, Daemon would likely come searching, and it would hardly do for him to find his prince skulking around the baths like some oversexed boy. But the moment he had overheard stayed with him throughout the day, and not for the way it made him hunger for Elaria. Well, not only for that. The warm air, the sounds of water and playful song and laughter, the smell of lemon and orange oils used to scent the water, perhaps Doran's way of going about things has something to recommend it after all, he thought, smiling, and that, of course, was when the idea of simply letting the truth get out as it would came to him. Thank you, brother, he thought, for it was, of course, what Doran would do. He called on Lady Jourdain later that very day, and then Lord Dalt, and each of his other lords and ladies in turn. In the course of these visits, too, he learned the names of some of the finest, and best connected, which also, of course, meant strategically talkative, dressmakers in the city. One of these was summoned with great fanfare to the household of the Prince of Dawn, and he told the cook to prepare a feast for all his company for some days hence. Nothing too grand, just something a little finer than usual. And so, slowly but surely, over the course of the days, the truth of Lady Stark's status among the Dornish party spread. Thus far, there had been no summons from the keep about the matter, no demand that he return Sansa Stark to the Lannisters, nor even that he answer for not doing so immediately, but he had another meeting with the other judges tomorrow, and he was cautiously optimistic that he would get some more satisfying reaction then. Not least because this time, along with Demon Sand, Ellaria and Zia would accompany him, to arrange the removal of Sansa Stark's things from her former quarters. He was not disappointed. They were discussing her testimony, he and Lord Tywine and the little Queen's father, when the other Queen burst in, raging as fiercely as all the seven hells. This will make things far more interesting, Oberyn thought, but said nothing, only stood with Tyrell and bowed in her direction. Lord Tywine, he noticed, did not rise, only looked at the white cloak close on his daughter's heels. Sir Meryn, is aught amiss with my guards? No, my Lord Trant said, blinking. They are just outside, you can see for yourself. He gestured to Lannister guards at the threshold. I do, he said. Perhaps they have gone deaf, then, for I cannot imagine why they should have disregarded my order that we be left to speak in peace. The Snake's guest. Cersea's emerald eyes were like wildfire. His honored guest. She walks free, my son's murderer, and it is his doing. Apparently concerned that there remained any doubt to which snake she referred, she pointed one of her slim white fingers at Oberyn. Why, your grace, Oberyn answered, as I recall, you informed the court at the feast that the imp was your son's murderer. Am I mistaken, or is he yet shut up in one of the keep's many towers? She did not give her father time to answer. Do not toy with me, Martell. Why did you not inform us at once that you had found her? He did, Lord Tywine said, and Cersei spun from Oberyn to stare at her father. He told myself and Lord Tyrell when first we met to prepare for Tyrion's trial. We have taken it into account in our planning. And you kept this from me. You allow him to shelter her. Something else her father had said struck her then. Tyrion's trial. I hope you only say that because you intend for her to be tried separately once his vile head is struck from his shoulders. Gods be good, father, have you taken leave of your senses? Cersei, Tywine began, but Oberyn thought this a fine opportunity, and seized it, despite, well, all right, perhaps because of it, knowing as he did that his brother would give him the most withering look for it, were he here. I confess, it came as a surprise to me as well, your grace, he said, taking his seat again at last and refilling his glass. But, then, Sir Amory Lorke is dead, and your father has told me that he is the one he sends to drag helpless girls from their beds. That silenced both the Queen and her father. And nearly caused Mace Tyrell to choke on his own wine, besides. Lord Tywine gazed at Oberyn for some moments. The castle might have fallen down atop them while Oberyn gazed back over the rim of his cup. Say something, he thought, please, Lannister, say something, give me a reason to open your throat. He would not know how long each of them might have waited for the other to blink, however, for the Queen spoke again. You were informed, father. Why was I not informed? We were told that she was a hostage, and that was bad enough, but now I learn from the guards that Martell's squire and his lady, the distaste in her voice was hard to miss, are here to oversee the removal of their honored guest's effects. Why is the girl not in the tower alongside her wretched husband? Who knows, in her giddiness over their crime, she may finally let him bed her. Perhaps he'll finally get that babe in her belly. Why you would want two traitors spawn holding Winterfell I can't imagine, but... Your Grace, Tyrell began, chidingly, but none of them paid him any mind. You were not informed, Lord Tywine said, because, as you are not a judge, it was not necessary that you be informed. As for why she is not with Tyrion, Prince Oberyn has Lady Sansa quite well guarded. There is no risk of her fleeing. Again, you mean? Circe asked. As she fled the night my son was murdered. On the imp's orders, I expect. There were 1,000 people in the throne room, and most of them fled. Did every one of them do the deed? Oberyn asked. Mine own paramour bade us leave, she was so distressed, yet you have not accused us of the murder. If there was more to Lady Stark's flight than a gently bred girl, one who has seen enough of death already, overcome by horror at what she had witnessed, perhaps it was because she feared someone would accuse her. Wisely so, it seems. Circe let out a bark of a laugh. You give the girl a great deal of credit. Sansa Stark's head is as empty as Sir Meryn's shield. If she thought she might be accused, it can only be because she knew she bore some guilt in the deed. Well, with that possibility discarded, I expect you mean to say that you agree with me that she likely shared the terror of those hundreds of others who fled the throne room. For I cannot imagine, Oberyn continued, noticing as if from a distance that his knuckles about his glass were white, that you think I would sit here and suffer such insults to a lady under the protection of the Prince of Dawn. Talking of your lady, my prince, she said, turning fully to face him, those wildfire eyes narrowing, and your own flight, for that matter, I am reminded that Maester Pycelle believes the poison was a very rare one, and little known, at that. Had he not also told me that my brother has stolen from his stores before, I might be a good deal more concerned how he had come by such. It was meant to frighten him, of course, but Oberyn had to bite back laughter at the naked fury on her father's face, and the strangled sounds that Mace Tyrell made, when she said that. Enough, Circe Tywine said, raising his voice for the first time. You disgrace yourself. My prince, Lord Tyrell, I am sure you will forgive a mother, overwrought with grief, for her intrusion on our business. The queen started as if she had been slapped, and her lovely face went red as she turned away from Oberyn. Your business, she repeated, staring at her father. This business is the murder of my son, my king, and yours as well, father, and yours, Tyrell. Mace Tyrell, who had been busying himself with studying the tapestry on the far wall, forgot himself, and looked at her for a moment, then quickly away again as she wheeled on Oberyn, and even yours, whatever you Dornishmen might. Sir Meryn, her father said, as if she had never spoken, my daughter is weary. See her back to her chambers, and send to Maester Pycelle for some dream wine. Once it arrives, see that she takes it promptly. I am the queen, Circe snarled, but her father never so much as glanced at her. Oberyn found, for one brief, strange moment, that he pitied her. Of course she is a monster, he thought to himself. But with such a father, what chance had she at becoming aught else? She raises an important point, my lord, Oberyn said, and Circe looked near as startled as she had at her father's interruption. Mace Tyrell, too, was gaping at him, but Lord Tywine's expression was as flat as ever. He continued, does Lady Stark stand accused? Will she be tried after her lord husband? As her guardian, for the time being, I have a right to know. So far, he understood, the only real case for her guilt was that she had unwittingly carried the weapon, and that both she and the imp had hated Joffrey. But he must have a definite answer, and now was as good a time as any. She does not stand accused, Lannister said, his eyes narrowing. He paused just enough for a yet to hang in the air before continuing. But the lady has been a ward of the crown since her father's death, and her lord husband, a Lannister, has spread his cloak of protection about her. This is the first I have heard of her having another guardian. Gods, it should have been Doran who came, Oberyn thought briefly. I was not made for this dance. Hopefully they would only be grateful if he did not make too much of how close the queen had come a few moments ago to accusing him. I took her into my safekeeping, and as I said at our first meeting, House Martell has at least as strong a claim to any Stark hostage as House Lannister. He began as carefully as he knew he ought, but could not keep it up as he continued. But let us be frank, we all know that the marriage is barely that. My maester called for a scepter to examine Lady Stark when he was seeing to the monstrous scars the late king had inflicted on her. Sir Meryn had the good grace to redden, at least, and look away, but Circe only scoffed. Joff never touched her, she said. I told him more than once that a king must not strike his lady wife. If she has told you. But she was not his wife, Oberyn spat. He was too quick about it, as always, but his mouth was full of something hot and bitter, something that made him feel half drunk. something whose taste he had nearly forgotten, for it was some 17 years since he tasted it fresh. "You are right, though, your grace, I misspoke. The king only had his guards beat her instead. That makes all the difference, does it not, Sir Meryn? 'Tis far more meet that a grown man should beat a helpless maid than that the king should do so, yes. I am sworn to obey the king," was all the man said, but he did not look up from his fine white boots. "Enough," Lord Tywine said. "Sir Meryn, I gave you an order some minutes ago, it seems to me. Why have you not seen to it yet?" "Do not touch me," Cersei hissed, as the knight reached for her. There was something desperate and awful in her voice, and once again, Oberyn found himself feeling the strangest flicker of pity for the woman. If one of my girls had drunk the strangler at her wedding dinner, he thought, my clothes would be soaked in blood by now. But she has no knowledge of blades or poisons, only ruling, and little enough knowledge of that. My Lord Mace Tyrell ventured at last, and his voice was only a little thinner, his face only a little less red than usual. "I do not see that it is so very wrong for my daughter's good mother to stay with us." The look that Cersei gave him was only a little less venomous than that she had given Oberyn himself. So much for gratitude, Oberyn thought, and if his mouth did not quite form a smile, at least he felt a little less adrift on his sea of anger. "As I was saying," he put in, taking another sip from his cup, "the girl remains a maid. If her lord husband is innocent, the marriage can be easily undone. And if we should decide against him, and make him even shorter than he is, or if he should confess and take the black." The Queen Regent said, with a little smirk. Oberyn did not allow himself to be distracted, to let her make further insinuations. "Whatever Tyrion Lannister's fate, there is a good chance Lady Sansa will find herself unmarried before the month is out. She will remain in my household because, well, you know, it is an oddity of my family that we are rather cautious of leaving any young lady in Lannister hands, much less one who already bears their scars." "A very pretty excuse," the Queen Regent said, her eyes narrowing. "While we are on the subject, tell me, I pray, does your family's concern for young ladies' welfare extend to young ladies who are Lannisters themselves? Or will you content yourself with simply poisoning my daughter's mind against her family, rather than poisoning—" She did not finish. Lord Tywine had risen at last, and crossed the chamber to his daughter. Before she could get the accusation out, Cersei's father struck her across the face with the back of his hand. "Gods be good," Mace said, redder than ever. "My lord, that is. I find I quite agree with Lord Tyrell, miracle of miracles," Oberyn said. His glass was only half empty, but he stood anyway, for no wine could wash that hot bitter taste out of his mouth. Much as he loathed Lord Tywine's daughter, there was little satisfaction in the display, no more than in the sight of a ferocious dog being kicked by its master, for after all, it is the master who bears the blame for the dog's savagery to begin with. The only thing like comfort was the knowledge that he had the upper hand now. Lord Tywine had no room to deny him after his daughter had twice come so close to threatening their fragile peace with Dawn with accusations against Oberyn. "You see, brother," he thought grimly, "I can get results after a fashion. As I said earlier, my lords, Lady Stark may certainly stand as witness for the imp. If you mean to make some accusation against her, however, I must warn you now that while I draw breath, she will never enter the Red Keep again but that she wills it. She may be questioned in my household, and I will tell you now that for each guard you bring, be his cloak white or gold or red, she will have 2 of mine own closer to her." Some in Essos said that jade was a living stone, that it grew brighter and richer with warmth and touch. Oberyn could well believe it. Where his daughter's eyes were wildfire, Tywine Lannister's were dead jade, pale and hard and cold. "She will be questioned 3 days hence," then was all he said, "on the first day of the trial." Yes, Oberyn thought, that will be close, but it ought to be time enough. But all he did was nod, and maneuver past Lannister on his way out. He saw that Queen Cersei was watching him go, her hand still on the cheek her father had struck. Chapter 5. Notes. Phew, sorry about the long interval. I ran into some issues around organizing this and the next few chapters, and they took me some time to untangle. The good news is, I think I've got the next couple of chapters pretty well sorted out, so the delay before the next chapter shouldn't be as long this time. Chapter text. Sansa. Prince Oberyn returned from the keep only briefly, but he did, at least, take time to visit with them before he departed again. When he entered the Lady Solar, she had never felt comfortable calling it hers, but Elaria always did, and it would be horribly rude to continue calling it Elaria's in contradiction. Eventually, one of the servants had simplified the matter by calling it Lady Solar, and the name, an acceptable compromise for all concerned, stuck. He was dressed downright drably. She glimpsed Sir Demon in the hall, and he, too, was similarly clad. "I have some business newly arisen," the prince said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Some further preparations, purchases, to make." "Be at ease, my lady," he said, though Sansa did not think she had shown at all how much she had tensed at what he said. Elaria could read her moods quite well, which was unsettling enough, though of course she tried her best not to let her see that, but at least she thought that Oberyn was not much more astute than any other man. But his eyes softened a little, as he went on, "'Tis nothing you need worry about. I owe you both an apology. In truth, talking with Tywin Lannister always puts me in a foul humor anyway, but today was uglier than usual. I have good news, though, and I did not think either of you would thank me for waiting until my mood improved to deliver it. First, you will stand as a witness for the imp, and may lend your voice to his defense. But the interview will take place here, only we judges and the imp himself will be in attendance, rather than the entirety of the court, and, as I told the Lord Hand, between you and every guard he brings with him will stand 2 of mine own. I swore to him, and I swear to you now, that so long as I draw breath, you will never again enter the Red Keep but that you wish it." It was funny that he should mention breath, Sansa thought, for all of a sudden she felt as if all the breath had been sucked from her. "This is some dream," she told herself. "Only some sweet dream. But oh, you know that you are dreaming, so enjoy it, savor every last bit of it." "Never," she repeated, tasting the word, trying to wrap her mind around it. Distantly, she heard Elaria prompt, "You said first, my love." Second, Prince Oberyn continued, "You will, most certainly, not stand accused yourself." Since he had said 2 of mine own, everything had seemed to go quiet, with a low whistling noise in her ears, as the wind might make around the walls of Winterfell during some particularly bad storm. Still, dimly, she heard what he had said, but she could not speak. She had no words, she had only the wolf inside of her, racing through the Godswood and howling for sheer delight at being alive. She could not think at all, for a minute. 3. 100. It must only have been a moment or two, though, for then she was aware, distantly, of Elaria wrapping her up in an embrace, and then, at last, a thought came to her, a memory, clear as sunrise. "He vowed that they would never have me again. I swear, by the old gods and the new, that so long as I draw breath they shall not take you unwilling from my protection." That's what he said, he promised, he vowed it by all the gods, and he did it, he kept his word, he is keeping it even now. Everything snapped back into clarity then, and she realized she was laughing, her arms wrapped as tightly around Elaria as Elaria's were around her. They had stood up, at some point, she noticed, and something about that was quite funny, so that she was breathless with laughter when Elaria finally let her go. Elaria crossed the room, then, to Oberyn, and she had not thought it was possible for her to hold someone more tightly than she had Sansa just a moment ago, but there she was. But then, Sansa noted, near delirious with relief and wonder, she hadn't kissed Sansa the way she was kissing Oberyn, either. The thought of that was funny, as well, and Sansa found that she had to sit down again, she was laughing so hard. She was weeping with laughter, now, she realized, burying her head in her hands, and then, even as she smiled, she wasn't laughing anymore, only weeping. Oh, what was wrong with her? This was good, this was wonderful, this was a miracle. "Sansa," she heard, and, with a deep, trembling breath, she looked up. Prince Oberyn had crossed the room towards her, but Elaria stood behind him, pulling gently at his hand twined with her own. "She is all right, my love," Elaria said, softly. "She only needs some time, I think." Her warm eyes smiled at Sansa, there was sorrow there, but mostly she was only smiling, gentle and so painfully kind. Sansa sucked in another breath, tried to dash her tears away. It is as she says, my PR, it is as she says." For she realized, suddenly, that for the first time, he had used only her name. Not Lady Stark or Lady Sansa or my lady, only Sansa. It would not do to think on that, though. "Forgive me, please, I'm quite well, truly." T's poor payment for everything. For where could she even begin to thank them? All the hardness that had been on the prince's face when he first came to them had melted away in the past few minutes. He had released Elaria's hand, she realized, as he knelt before her. He must have, for both his hands were holding her, one on each of her shoulders. Sangza noticed then that she was still weeping. So strange, that she should feel so happy, that she should not feel she was weeping, and yet tears should continue to spill down her cheeks. "I wish you would not weep," Sangza Oberyn murmured, "but if it is not with pain or fear, then I can bear it." And then he kissed her cheek, the very track of one of her tears. His lips were warm and a little rough, but still so gentle, and she heard herself sigh before she quite knew that she did it. She couldn't help herself then, even as she blushed with the knowledge that the Prince of Dawn just kissed me. She wrapped her arms around him and hugged him as fiercely as she had Elaria. He laughed a little as she did, but it was not mocking, only sweet and warm and low, as if he were only pleasantly surprised, as if he had not thought to expect anything half so nice, and then he answered in kind, embracing her as well. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, as he held her tightly to him, and she held him tightly to her, so that she could not, if someone asked, have said which of them was really holding the other. "Thank you," she repeated. They seemed like such weak words, but she could not think of any others. She could not say how long they stayed like that, but when she opened her eyes, when had she closed them? She saw that Elaria was beaming at them both, her eyes glittering a little, her clasped hands pressed to her breast, her head tilted slightly as if she were deep in thought. The sight made Sangza blush again, a little, but she couldn't help smiling back, even as she loosened her arms a little. "Forgive me, my prince," she said at last. Weeping had stuffed her nose up, and her voice was all thick and trembly, but still, she could not stop smiling. "You said you had more business to attend to, and you can hardly do it with me clinging to you." "I don't know," he said, as if in thought. He had not loosened his grip on her at all, but she found that she didn't mind. "He smells very nice," she thought giddily, "a bit like Elaria. There is some spice they both smell of a little, I think, but different, too. You would be surprised what I could do while carrying one of my girls around. But, then, you are rather larger than the littler ones, and the elder ones long ago stopped tolerating such foolishness from me, so I have not tried it with one closer to your size." She laughed again at that, and heard him laugh a little, too, and Elaria, who had come back over to the chairs where they had been sitting, besides. Everything looked different, somehow, as if the light were a little brighter, or the edges to everything were a little clearer. Another moment, another soft kiss to her cheek, and then he released her. Was she imagining that he was slow to do it, almost reluctant? "If he is, it is only because he fears that you are hysterical enough to faint dead away," she chided herself, but even the voice that said such things sounded gentler, at this moment, than it usually did. It was less like Queen Cersei or Joffrey sneering at her and more like Elaria, the sweet way she teased Oberyn sometimes, when it was only the three of them together, with nothing but fondness in her voice. "Still, though," the prince continued, "my errands will take me to a few places I would not have you to visit. Some of our stores are low on ingredients, and though Maester Raymond would send a servant, Elaria can tell you that I never like to leave such things to others." Sangza glanced over at Elaria, who had taken her seat again, but she was gazing at Oberyn, thoughtful. "Indeed," was all she said, though, and then she seemed to notice Sangza's eyes upon her and beamed once more. "Well, my dear, I think this calls for a celebration, don't you?" What she meant by that, it turned out, was a feast, for tomorrow night. Elaria told her of it as they sat down to supper in the gardens, and the word made Sangza's stomach turn over. She pushed her plate away, glad that she hadn't eaten too much just yet. "A feast," she repeated, and tried not to cringe at the tremor in her voice. Elaria noticed it, though, and looked up from her cup, frowning a little, and Sangza tried to compose herself. "You used to love them," she said to herself. "And they're hardly going to invite Cersei Lannister. What are you so afraid of, you silly girl?" Before she could apologize, though, Elaria smiled at her, and put her cup down to pat Sangza's hand. "Forgive me, my lady, after what happened at the last feast you attended, 'tis hardly surprising that you should find the prospect unsettling. You must think me a beast for not considering that to begin with." It was only a joke, Sangza knew, but still, she felt she ought to disagree. Of course not, she said quickly. I'm only being stupid. I have never known you to be anything of the sort, sweeterling, Elaria said, with the same matter-of-fact warmth as ever. She did not give Sangza time to disagree, only patted her hand once more and then took her cup back up. Strangely, that made Sangza believe it, as she might not have had the lady made much of it. Well, she continued, it shames me to admit this, but in truth, calling it a feast is a good deal too generous. We haven't time for many grand preparations, after all. But Oberyn wished to do something to honor you once you'd settled in, and a poor welcome will still be better than none, so a merry supper with our host seemed just the thing. And with the news today, well, I think a bit of merriment is quite in order. As much as we can manage, at any rate. A few more courses than usual, and Sir Aaron Corgyle brought a singer with him and has said he will loan him to us for the night, and I think we might even scrape together enough musicians for some dancing. Do you like to dance, Sangza? I do, my lady, Sangza said, and she managed, this time, to smile. Although I do not think I have ever learned any Dornish dances. Well, then, this will be a fine opportunity for it, Elaria said, clapping her hands, and just like that, it was all settled. Strangely, Sangza almost believed her that she should be at ease. As supper went on, she found herself growing more resigned to the idea, and by the time the berries and cream were set before them, a part of her was looking forward to it. It was good of Elaria to tell me as early as possible, she thought, remembering that first visit from the dressmaker. Besides, she thought, as she went to bed that night, I would like to learn Dornish dances. Oh, it's been so long since I danced with anyone. Not since her wedding, and then only a little. When she slept at last, she dreamed of a feast, bigger and grander than anything Elaria had planned. It was in a hall like the Great Hall at Winterfell, only there was no roof, and the snow was warm and dry as it drifted down around the revelers, melting away before it could do more than kiss their hair. She was dancing with a man, and she knew every step, and only when she looked over and saw Elaria watching from the dais, her dark eyes gleaming with delight, her hands clapping in time with the music, did Sangza realize she was dancing with Oberyn. Then, suddenly, everyone else was gone from the hall, though the music still fluttered about them. Elaria rose, and as she came around from the table, Lady came running through the hall to meet her. She laughed as the wolf raced in a joyful circle about her, and when she finally fell still, Elaria reached out and scratched behind her ears. It has grown late, my dears, Elaria said, looking up, as Lady licked her hand. It has, Oberyn agreed, though he did not let go of Sangza's hand as he walked over to his lady. It did not seem strange that she went with the two of them toward the doors. It seemed right, perfect. Lady was not troubled by it, either, but bounded past the three of them, racing for the Godswood, adding her voice to the lively cries of her siblings. Elaria. Before they set off for the keep that morning, Elaria had asked Sangza if there were anything in particular she missed from her rooms in the keep, any trinkets or books or items of clothing. She looked surprised by the question, as if she had never thought about it. That, it turned out, was because she hadn't. No jewels? Elaria had asked. Nothing of the sort. All of my jewels were taken from me when Joff became king, she said, her voice only wobbling a little. Some of my dresses were left me, but they are too small by now. And, she went a little pink then, and looked away from Elaria, down at her plate, as she continued. And with the things you have been so kind as to order for me, and the dresses you have given me yourself, I am more than sufficiently provided for. Elaria nodded, and did not embarrass her by saying anything further, only smiled and kissed her brow. She had been pleased to see that Sangza did not blush at that anymore. The task might have easily been left to Zia, in truth, but Elaria did not trust them to pay much attention to a maid, not even with Demon at her side. 2. She hoped that she might have a chance to speak with one of Sangza's maids, perhaps even find the one who had dressed her hair. She, Zia, and Demon were shown to Sangza's rooms by a crimson-cloaked guard, however, who shrugged when she inquired after the maids. Her Grace wanted them as witnesses. What she did with them in the meantime, I couldn't say, lady, he added as a snide afterthought, his leer showing her how much he thought of that address. That will be all, Sir Demon said coldly, and shut the door, none too gently, in the fellow's face. As Sangza had said, though, the clothes themselves were not much to speak of, and what might still fit would not be much use to her for long besides. She would be for Sunspear before too long, likely as soon as the trial was done, and most of these, with their heavy fabrics and long sleeves, would be much too heavy for her in Dawn. But in truth, they were also far too plain for a lady of her station. They wanted to keep her in her place, Elaria thought. And that was why, for all that there was hardly any point to it, that they might well discard the clothes as soon as they were delivered to the Martell household, she was not sorry that Oberyn was so intent on making a show of flaunting Sansa to the Lannisters. It was, after all, for that reason that she had really gone. There were a few things she thought might be worth keeping, however, even among the clothes. Some linens and cloaks, the bodices were stiffer and tighter than those largely worn in Dawn, but it might take her time to grow more accustomed to Dornish fashions, so there was no harm in bringing them, too. They had set out together, but she, Xia, and Daemon left the keep ahead of her prince, having finished making what few arrangements were necessary quickly enough. Of anything that might have been Lady Catelyn's jewels, there had been no sign. Her prince's squire said that he would ask about later, though neither of them was particularly optimistic. One of our princes might press the issue, he added, once things are more settled. They'll have a harder time ignoring Martells than two sands and a maid. I suppose it's for my sake I want them, not hers, Elaria admitted. It was a warm, bright day, too fine for the litter, and she rode beside him through the streets, a few of Oberyn's guards ahead and a few behind. The lady seemed surprised that I had even thought of such a thing. I think she had nearly forgotten about it herself. I expect it's one of the smaller indignities she endured, Sir Daemon said. I expect you're right, Sir Xia said grimly. Elaria sighed, and after a few moments of thought, she said, Sir Daemon, choose one or two of the guards. Xia, you and the others can continue back to the prince's household, but we'll continue on to the market, I think. The Dornish had settled off the Street of Looms, and further along, there was a little market she and some of the others of the Dornish party had visited of an afternoon. Xia smiled, catching her eye, as she and the rest of the guards turned off into a narrower little road that would take them home. As the evening was an ever a pretty one, Elaria had their supper laid out in the gardens. There was a little chill in the air, and, trying to set Sansa more at her ease after the talk of tomorrow night's feast unsettled her, Elaria complained of it cheerfully. She proceeded thence to the capital's weather more generally. Oh, tea's hot enough in Dawn, certainly, she said, but the damp here makes the heat seem to sit so much more heavily on one, don't you think? Sansa seemed uncertain, but this time, at least, her hesitation did not seem to be terror. I hardly know, she said. I never knew any kind of southern summer until we came here. Ah, of course, Elaria said. Well, I suppose it will not surprise you, but I much prefer Dawn's heat to this. There, at least, if one stays in the shade, one can get some relief. With such damp as they have here, one has no escape. Fitting, Sansa said. She barely spoke loud enough for Elaria to hear her over the sound of the breeze in the leaves. Indeed, were she any other lady, Elaria might assume she had spoken without thinking. But Lady Stark was more careful with her words than even the stingiest of merchants with his coins, her caution both painstaking and, for her hosts, painful to see. So Elaria did not try to hide her chuckle, and instead refilled her cup and raised it in a salute to the lady's observation. Sansa ducked her head, her cheeks flaming red, but at last she chanced to look up again, and gifted Elaria with one of her rare, lovely smiles. They had nearly finished when Sansa ventured, at last, the food was all so delicious. It was a little thing, but it was rare that Sansa would speak up first, so Elaria was quite happy to encourage her by engaging her on the topic. The cook was a most pleasant surprise. As it happens, we feared we would find no one with any experience at Dornish cooking in this city, but Lady Blackmont's son has visited before, and recalled a few establishments where we might find someone passable. The establishments had been brothels, but Elaria suspected that might be rather too much of a familiarity for Sansa just yet. Would you tell me aught of northern food, she asked instead. It is rather plain, in comparison, Sansa said. I confess I had feared the spices might be too strong when I arrived here, and you first invited me to dine with you. She did not look at Elaria as she spoke, and her voice had dropped. Gods be good, she is afraid I will take offense. Many visitors are taken by surprise, she said, and patted the girl's hand once again. But you will grow accustomed to it, I think, most do, in time. Princess Myrcella took to the spices right away, the hotter the better, for her. Myself, I am rather picky about such things, I admit. Some cooks use spices to hide that the other flavors are lacking. I cannot abide such laziness. I expect any cook in my household to manage food that would be delicious with no spice at all. A dish should be complemented by its spices, not overpowered. The first time I had pepper was in White Harbor, Sangza said, and with only a little coaxing, she told the story. Her father had taken her 3 times, with her elder brother, while their next sister had only been twice. Rob had never had it either. It made us sneeze. We thought that great fun, and begged father to bring some back to Winterfell. My brother Bran was still a baby then, and if you sneezed at him, he would laugh as if it were the funniest thing anyone had ever done. 2 of my daughters were the same, Ellaria said, smiling at the memory. I had forgotten. Oberyn had a knack for these monstrous, theatrical sneezes. Their sisters would play in the water gardens, and he would entertain the babes until they were strong enough for the water on their own. I expect you could hear him all the way in Sunspear, and the babes' laughter, too. Sansa laughed at that, a true laugh, warm and bright. Her face was a little pink with the laughter and the wine, and the lantern's light caught in her hair like the sun on the coppery scales of the guard's armor, and most lovely of all, for at least a few moments, the sorrow in her eyes seemed to have eased a little, mellowed to something that simply added depth to her beauty. Just for a moment, Ellaria felt something strange in her heart, sweet and startling as a splash of cold water in the height of summer. Oh, she thought. Oh, dear, I can't tease Oberyn for being infatuated any longer, can I? Chapter 6. Chapter text. Sansa. They dressed her in one of Ellaria's gowns for the feast. Or, at least, in a gown that Ellaria claimed was hers, though little work had had to be done to fit it to Sansa, and it was in a color, the light, bright blue of the first clear sky after a summer snow, that she had never seen Ellaria, who favored warmer, less delicate colors, wear. It was 2 pieces, really, the richer blue outer robe, which had long panels rather than a skirt, like the petals of a flower, and underneath, a gown that covered her more fully, of the same blue shade but lighter, so pale it was nearly white. Both parts were made of a silk soft as clouds, draped about her so lightly that if they did not kiss her skin when she moved she could have forgotten they were there. She felt as if she were a part of the sky, and when Zia fastened a belt around her waist such as the Dornish favored, silver, with a moonstone crescent surrounded by stars with blue topaz hearts, it seemed the only thing that kept her from flying away. Ellaria joined them as another maid, Shella, was dressing her hair, and gave a low cry of delight. "Oh, my dear, how beautiful you look. Of course, you are always beautiful, but how that color suits you." "Thank you," Sansa said. "And you are even lovelier." She was dressed similarly to Sansa, but in an orange outer robe and a yellow inner one, with a ruby-studded copper belt. Even her inner garment was open lower than Sansa's, but it only made her look more elegant. Sansa doubted whether she would ever have the courage to wear something so womanly. Ellaria smiled indulgently. "You are far too kind, my dear. Next to you, I am a rather forgettable specimen." "No, no," as Sansa began to protest, "that is precisely the goal. After all, tonight is meant to honor you. But I suppose we can agree that we are both lovely, and move on to my true purpose." She was holding, Sansa noticed then, a little chest, and she set it down before Sansa and waited, beaming, until Sansa finally reached to open it. On doing so, she gasped. The chest's contents glittered, a riot of metals and jewels. She had never seen any of them before, she was sure, never seen Ellaria wearing them. "I should have gotten more silver," Ellaria was saying, thoughtfully, even as Sansa gaped. "There's not much you'll be able to wear this evening. But I thought this, at least," and reaching in, she plucked out a gleaming silver and bronze comb. "This," Sansa finally managed. "This is too much, my lady." She had gone red, she could feel it, and she could not meet Ellaria's eyes as she closed the chest again. Ellaria knelt before her then, setting the comb aside and taking Sansa's hands in her own. She did not speak, only waited until Sansa looked directly at her. She did not seem insulted or angry, or even very sad. She only wore that same soft, loving smile as always. When she spoke at last, it was in a quiet voice, as if they were the only 2 people in the world. "I know you have been too long accustomed to cruelty to adjust quickly to kindness, so let us say that instead of taking them for your own sake, you are taking them for mine." Zia could tell you how angry I was, when I could not get them to tell me aught of what might have been done with the jewels your lady mother sent south with you. And these are not so fine as you may think at first glance. In truth, I bought them yesterday, after we left the Red Keep, on the Street of Looms. That is why Zia returned home before I did. They are nothing half so fine as a lady of your stature ought to wear, but they are at least a step in the right direction, I think. Of course Sangza managed. I am sorry. You must think me so ungrateful, after all that you and the prince have done for me. I think nothing of the sort, she said, gentle and firm as the earth itself. And I hope very much that you do not believe Oberyn does, either. Indeed, there is a reason that we did not wait until later, and have a grander feast, something more appropriate for the Lady of Winterfell. It seemed to me that such a thing might require too much discomfort on your part for the sake of our own pride. Well, she added, her eyes twinkling, that, and the fact that my sweet prince has no patience whatsoever. Sansa laughed at that, a little, and Ellaria kissed each of her hands in turn, and rose again. Opening the chest again, she drew out a bracelet, all silver, etched all over with what might have been sunbursts. I liked this in particular, she said, pointing to one of the designs. They look like suns, but I think they also look a little like snowflakes. Summer and winter, dawn and the north. It's perfect, Sansa breathed, and meant it. Ellaria slid it onto her wrist, then picked up the comb she had taken out earlier. As she passed it to Zia, Sansa got a better look at it, and realized that the comb itself was mostly of silver. The bronze flashes she had seen were snakes twined along the back. The sun was the symbol of House Nymerus Martell, of course, but the snake was all Prince Oberyn. Something about the thought made her blush, just a little, but she felt a strange warmth in her chest as well, as Zia tucked the comb into her hair. Looking in the glass, Sansa saw that the two snakes sat atop her hair like a little tiara. Lovely, Ellaria hummed, stroking Sansa's hair. Sansa could not bring herself to speak it out loud, but a little part of her thought, oh, I am, thanks to them, and when Ellaria caught her eye in the glass, she was able, at least, to smile. We both are, she said, remembering what Ellaria had said earlier. You are a very sweet lady, Ellaria answered, wrapping her arms around Sansa's chest from behind and hugging her, then pressing another soft kiss against her cheek. Sansa felt herself blush once more, but it was such a queer feeling. This time, it wasn't because she was frightened or embarrassed at all. It was as if she had been laughing too hard, or racing around the grounds of Winterfell with Arya and Robb and Jon, trying to toss snowballs up at Bran as he ran along the walls. The others were all better runners anyway, so once Baby Rickon was big enough to run around with them as well, she would stay with him, for it made him feel better not to be the only one who lagged behind. Besides, she pointed out to him, sometimes Bran would double back, and then they would be the ones to catch him. It was a sort of giddy, warm, breathless feeling. Perhaps the feast will not be so bad, she thought. It has given me an excuse for all this niceness, after all. And besides, she had met some of the other lords and ladies of Dorne before, had even bathed with Sir Daemon Sand's sisters, half-sisters, she recalled, but the distinction did not seem near so important to the Dornish as it had in Winterfell, and they had all been just as kind and patient and merry as Ellaria and Prince Oberyn. There was a knock at the door then, and as though her very thoughts had summoned him up, Prince Oberyn entered, followed by Sir Daemon. You look lovely, my ladies, the squire said, bowing. Lady Stark, I hope you will not think me too presumptuous if I beg you for a dance later. I fear if I wait until the dancing actually begins, I shall have to fight all the other fellows for the honor. Sansa found herself smiling at him as Ellaria pulled her to her feet. There were butterflies in her stomach, but for the first time in ages, she was not more afraid than anything else. You are very kind to say so, sir, she said to Daemon. Only I do not know much of Dornish dances. I hope your boots are sturdy, she added, in a rush, and felt absurdly pleased with herself when he laughed. Your slipper would be the nicest thing ever to land on my foot, I dare say, he answered, with a sly look at his prince. Oberyn rolled his eyes. I dropped one horseshoe some years ago and he has never let me forget it. Perhaps you ought to squire for me instead, Sansa, you are a good deal less apt to complain than the one I have now. You broke two of my toes, Sir Daemon retorted. They have never bent quite the right way since, he told Sansa. We should all be glad that I have good boots, so you are spared the sight of them. I have seen you in the baths, Daemon. Your feet are still as handsome as the rest of you. My lady. Prince Oberyn held out his arm, and Sansa stepped aside to let Ellaria by, but she passed him by and took Sir Demons instead. Oh, Sansa realized, understanding suddenly. This was all in her honor, and, she realized, they called her Lady Stark in front of others. I outranked nearly everyone in the prince's hall, she thought, but it seemed such a strange notion, after so long, as if she were thinking of some other person, some other great lady. She could understand the idea, but she could not quite believe that the lady in question was her. "Forgive me, my prince," was all she said, when it dawned on her how long she had stood there gaping. "I am not used to such formal affairs." He snorted, putting his other hand over hers as they followed the others. "No, I expect you are not," he said, and then added, "You know, technically, I believe you even outrank me, my lady. Perhaps you ought to have the highest seat tonight." "Oh, no," she gasped, "but you're the host, and you are teasing me," she said, for she had caught how the corner of his mouth twitched. "I am," he admitted. "Forgive me, Sansa. It was not very gallant of me." "You have already been more gallant than any other person I have met in this city," she said, softly, and he rubbed her hand with his own, gently, as if in answer. Feeling brave, suddenly, she said, "Thank you, again, for all you have done to keep me from them." For she did not wish to say the name Lannister, did not wish to let even their name be here, tonight, when everything seemed so lovely. "In truth," he said, his tone still light as ever, as they approached the great hall of the manse, "I owe part of the victory on that count to them. The queen came very close, well, but that is not a story for such a merry evening. It has its own grim humor to it, though, perhaps another day. As to your thanks, Sansa, it is the least you are owed, so far as I am concerned. You are not the lady for whom I came to this city seeking justice, but you deserve it no less than she did." He had never spoken openly to her of his sister, even Ellaria had only mentioned her once or twice, and indirectly at that. Sansa did not know what to say, but, for a moment, she laid her other hand atop his, and that seemed to be enough. When she chanced to look up, he was gazing down at their hands, each atop the others, with a soft little smile on his face that she had seen only now and again, and only for Ellaria. Oberyn. Sansa was magnificent. That should hardly have come as a surprise. He had known she was a beauty since he first laid eyes on her, trying to fade into some corner of the court, and nearly succeeding. But, then, it was not her beauty that had ever been in question, it was certainly not her beauty that had taken his breath away when he and Daemon first entered the Solar this evening. It was something else, something in the way she carried herself, some strange small thing that had changed in her, so that he could hardly believe she was that same ghostly creature from the Red Keep. She was still quiet, still a perfect image of courtesy and grace. But there was something different, nonetheless. She smiled more, indeed, that she smiled at all was a change from the young lady he had first glimpsed. Her courtesy and grace were smoother, gentler, warmer, less icy armor than warm, rich garments. He felt her trembling a little as he led her through the hall to the high table, but who could blame her for that? Modest though the feast was, the fact remained that near all the great families of Dorne were represented, not to mention retainers, knights, and servants. Even so, though, as he seated her beside him, at his right hand, she did not seem so brittle as she had at supper that first day, when it was only the three of them. She might, almost, have been any ordinary maid, only a little nervous. With each course, she seemed more at her ease. By the time the soup was cleared away, she looked almost as young as she truly was. When he made a bawdy joke to Ellaria on his left, he heard laughter from both his sides, though Sansa's was as quick and choked as any proper young lady's ought to have been at such a comment. At last, he said to her directly, "I do not know that I have ever seen you merry, my lady. It suits you." Her cheeks went a little pink, but she did not hide her face, at least, meeting his smile with her own. "You are very kind to say so, my prince. 'Tis Lady Sand's clothing that suits me more, I think, she has exquisite taste. And I have never had a meal under your roof that was less than delicious, so the rest of the credit must go to your cook, and yourself, for laying such a table." "You are too sweet," my lady, Ellaria said from his other side. "Such of my things as you have suffered me to drape you in are quite lucky to have the duty. You would be beautiful in rags, so it is hardly a surprise that you are beautiful in my own dull pieces." "We had agreed," she added to Oberyn, her eyes twinkling, to say that we are both lovely, so if she will insist upon belittling her own beauty for my sake again, I shall have to do the same. She has violated the terms of our peace, as it were. An unkind accusation, he answered, laughing. To besmirch Lady Stark's honor so. She is quite right that your clothing suits her beautifully, though I dare say, my lady, that Elaria is quite right that you would look beautiful even in rags. You are quite right about my cook deserving some of the credit, though, the woman is a true gem. At any rate, I hope I may flatter myself that this is not such an abysmal little festivity as to insult you. She smiled, and shook her head. You are very kind, my prince. I have not been to any feast so, that is. He resisted the urge to make a jest of it. Somehow there was a difference between her hesitation now, and her hesitation when she feared to offend. She is much affected, but she cannot say how. He could not have guessed how he knew, but suddenly he was sure of it. So, for once, Oberyn only sat and waited, hoping that the smile on his face would be enough to encourage her. At last, looking down at her cup, she said, softly, for a moment, now and then, it is as if I am at my father's table again. The words stole the breath from him, and he could not remember, for a moment, to smile. Perhaps that was why she ducked her head, busying herself with the salad. Forgive me, my prince, she mumbled. I know that is a stupid thing to. No, he interrupted, placing his hand on hers, stilling it. The hall was as loud as ever, but somehow it might only have been the two of them. Forgive me, my lady, if I gave you the impression that I take offense, it is only that your words moved me deeply. If you feel half so safe under my roof as you did under your lord father's, if you feel half so cherished by my brother's people as you did by your father's, half so free and merry at my table as when you were a girl, I can think of no greater honor you could pay to my household, or to me. At last, Sansa met his eyes once more. She did not speak, but she did not need to. Then there was more wine, and the spell was broken, until he noticed, after refilling her cup, that she was not drinking, only staring at it. My lady, he asked her. She started, looked over at him, and smiled, then took up her cup, and stood. Oberyn was dimly aware of Elaria on his left calling for silence, and joined in himself, absently, but he could not take his eyes off of her. My prince, she said, when the music had broken off and the hall was quiet, and somehow, for all her care and caution and quiet, her voice might have carried across a battlefield, and his heart seemed to flare with pride in her as he noticed that it hardly shook at all. My good lords and ladies, and knights, and squires, and good Maester Raymond, and all you others, for there is not a man or woman among you, whatever your birth, who has shown me aught but courtesy and kindness, and far more of it than I deserve. Oh, that was beautifully done, he thought, even as he glimpsed Zia, below the salt, beaming, and patting the other girls proudly. He would quibble with the more than I deserve remark, but he supposed it was an ordinary enough courtesy, really. I did not think to speak at all, so I have no pretty words prepared, certainly nothing so fine as befits the honor, and the affection, which I already hold for you all in my heart. I shall not, therefore, trouble you long, which I am sure you are all glad of, for what could a girl of 3 and 10 say to interest you, truly? Much and more, I am sure, Oberyn said, for more than I deserve was one thing, but that was quite enough. When the laughter faded, he added, I have never known the lady to speak but to say something well worth the hearing. The tips of her ears turned pink at that, but she went on, and he thought her voice was a little steadier now. My prince, you all can see, has shown quite well why I could not forgive myself if I said nothing. When first I left the north, I knew that Southron ways were different, that it was a new land I went to, but I was delighted all the same. I was born in the spring, but truly, I was a summer child. It is only, she paused a moment, took a breath, and continued. It is only here, now, under the banner of House Nymerus Martell and among so much of the chivalry of Dorne, that I have at last begun to think that I was not so foolish in my delight, after all. She bowed her head, and finished, her voice quavering only a bit. From the bottom of my heart, whatever gods may have delivered me to you, she said, whether the 7 gods of my mother, or the nameless ones of my father, or Mother Rowan, I thank them, just as, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. As she sat, the hall was quiet, but as the chatter began to resume, someone, a woman, and one from the vicinity of his own maids, unless he was much mistaken, began to raise a call of Stark. Stark. The rest took it up, and at last, Oberyn stood, and raised his glass. "To Lady Stark," he said. "Lady Stark," the hall echoed, and though he felt her tremble, a little, at his side, though her face was red, she lifted her head up once again. The smile under her bright, solemn eyes was small, but it was no bashful maid's, it was a lady's, a princess's, a queen's. It was over the sweet, honeyed pastries layered with pistachios and blood orange tarts, that he asked her some silly thing, even he could hardly have said what, he only found that he wanted to hear her speak, to see her smile again. Sansa did not answer, and looking over, he saw that she had not touched the food on her plate. She was frowning. It did not seem to Oberyn that she looked troubled, only thoughtful. Her head was tilted, and when she caught him looking at her, she blushed a little and said, "Forgive my inattention, my prince. I do not know this song. Is it Dornish?" He listened more closely to the opening notes, and as the singer began, he smiled, recognizing it. "No. It's from the Riverlands. A good hero's song, about a brave young king and his victory in battle. My mother was from the Riverlands," she said, "but I never." "Your mother will not have heard it in her childhood," he said. "It is a new song, and it is certainly not one they will have sung at court. You see, the brave young king outwits an old lion, and wins a great victory over him on his own land. It is called A Wolf in the Night." Oh, she breathed, and the look that passed over her face as she understood, the awe and the sorrow and the secret, raging delight, was one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen, and the most terrible. After each verse, properly, there was to come a chorus of howling. Lady Blackmont's children were among the first to raise their voices at this end of the hall, perhaps because Daemon, who sat between Sansa and Gynessa Blackmont, had overheard their discussion, and threw himself into it lustily. But to Oberyn's other side, Ellaria was howling too, he noted, and the river of his love for her was made just a little deeper for it. By the end, though, near all the hall rang with howling. There was silence at his right hand, however. When he looked over at Sansa, Oberyn was horrified, at first, for all he saw were the tears that ran down her cheeks. "Gods be good," he recalled, "it's about Oxcross, her scars," but before he could say anything, as if she knew, Ellaria put her hand on his. "She is smiling, my love," she whispered. And so she was. As the last notes faded, the hall echoed louder than ever with the howling of Dorne's wolves, and Sansa Stark, he saw, was smiling as he had never seen her smile, as he had never guessed she could smile. Daemon had passed her a handkerchief, and even as she dashed away her tears, she kept smiling. He could not help asking, though, "Are you well, my lady?" She did not seem to trust herself to speak, but she nodded, still smiling. She was no longer weeping, and the tears had made her eyes shine all the bluer. At last, she said, softly, "Perhaps Joff had me beaten because he knew there would never be a song so wonderful about him." Oberyn was shocked into silence for a moment, but when she finally dared a look at him, and he saw the sparkle in her eye, he burst into laughter. Perhaps he was imagining the way her eyes sparkled, the way she smiled like any mischievous girl, even as she nibbled delicately at her pastry, but gods, he hoped not. Daemon had had the right of it, of course, he was lucky to have claimed a dance already. Perros Blackmont was quick to ask as well, and then each the Manwadis in turn, jolly old Lord Dagos, his brother Sir Miles, and each of his sons. The top of Little Dicon's head hardly reached her chin, but she accepted him as graciously as all the others, and when she confided that he must help her with the steps, for she did not know this one, he was as solemn as the proudest knight could have been. Near every man or boy among the Dornish chivalry strong enough to dance asked her, and a few of the ladies besides, Ellaria chief among them. "She seems happy," he told Ellaria, when he managed to get her to himself for a dance of his own. "She seems comfortable," Ellaria finished for him, as he searched for the right word. He would have kissed her, for no other reason than that he was happy too, for the first time since he had left his daughters and his brother and his home behind and come to this wretched 7 times damned city. The dance did not allow them that much time standing still, however, and he had to settle for hoping she could see the affection in his eyes. As the festivities came to their close, he claimed princely prerogative, and asked for the last dance himself. Sansa was fading by then, he could tell, and was glad the musicians played something suitably sleepy and mellow. "I am not one of these young bucks, you know," he told her, nodding in Daemon's direction. Sansa smiled at that, and he did not mention that it made him feel many years younger. All in all, Oberyn Martell Sigil may have been the sun, but it was Sansa Stark who truly shone tonight. The thought struck him after, as he and Ellaria were undressing, and when he spoke it aloud, she laughed fondly. "I haven't seen you in so poetical a mood in ages," she said, kissing the back of his neck. "It suits you, my love." "Well, but am I wrong?" he asked, leaning back so that she could kiss his mouth, instead, even if he was upside down to her. "Indeed not," she said, after kissing him, as they crawled beneath the covers together. She yawned, but went on, sleepily, "I can think of no better inspiration than our sweet lady." He hardly knew he had fallen asleep when he found himself washed in the sudden morning light, blinking up at Demon, who had thrown open the curtains on the bed. "Oberyn," he said, and that was all he needed to sit up, his heart racing. Demon only used his name in lust or in panic, and the tension on his face made it all too clear which this was. Ellaria was awake too, he saw, blinking against the sudden light, but her mouth drawn tight already. "Sansa," she said, before Oberyn could. "Demon." Oberyn heard them speaking more, but their voices seemed far away, in some tongue he did not know. There was a rushing noise in his ears, a howling gale of noise. He was only half aware of himself as he grabbed up the clothing Demon handed to him, and when the torrent of sound in his ears faded a little, Oberyn realized he heard soft weeping in the next room. He opened the door to find one of the maids, Chella, trembling and pale, with Zia comforting her. "My prince," Zia began, but Oberyn was already past them, racing through the manse's halls. When he saw the cluster of guards outside Sansa's door, he realized that he had taken up his daggers as well. And inside, when he saw, huddled on her bed, eyes wide and seeing nothing, the ghostly creature he had first seen in the Red Keep, as if none of this time had passed, as if she had never smiled or laughed or been kissed by Ellaria or begun, perhaps, he had thought, hoped, but now he knew he had only flattered himself, to feel safe, he was glad to have them. Chapter 7 Notes TL:*Dr: he won't even appear in this story, and still, Littlefinger manages to mess with Sansa. Hate that guy, seriously. Chapter text. Sansa. It was the maid's scream that woke her. Sansa's eyes flew open, and somehow, this felt familiar to her, this terror, more so than the days of kindness and dignity had. A little part of her, twisted and dark, knew what to do in that moment of waking and terror. She went still, and waited, and it must have been a minute or three, at least, until she became aware of a soft touch on her shoulder. The hound, she thought first, for no one else in the keep had ever touched her so gently, but then, no, but he fled, he's gone. "My lady," she heard, as if from a very great distance, and she realized suddenly that Ellaria Sand was kneeling beside her bed. Her eyes were as wide and dark and sweet as a doe's, and she had folded her hands, both of them, on the bed, just next to Sansa's own, but not quite touching them, as if she knew, somehow, that right now, in this strange state, Sansa could not have told a gentle touch from any other. Perhaps that is what it means to be a paramour, Sansa reflected, the strange thought fluttering through her mind like the bright, sweet song of some exotic bird. In the Red Keep they said she worshipped some strange love goddess, but she seemed to keep the faith of the Seven to Sansa. Perhaps it was only a misunderstanding, perhaps she had some divine gift of kindness instead. It was those hands, gentle and graceful as her own lady mother's, but younger and less familiar, though she knew them, already, so well, and somehow redolent of strangeness and excitement as well as comfort, that brought Sansa back to herself, and the knowledge that she was no place Joffrey could touch her now. Joff was dead, for one thing, and even if he weren't, she was still outside the keep, she was under Martell protection, he had sworn it, and that she would never have to go back, besides. She was under Martell protection, and the prince's own paramour was gazing at her and waiting for her answer. Sansa was embarrassed then, but she knew that if she spoke of it everyone would only be kind, and that would only be more embarrassing still. The thought of so much kindness was nearly as frightening as her first shock at the scream that woke her, but she must not ignore Lady Sand. She managed a smile, and reached out for one of the lady's hands, and turned her head to blink toward the place whence the maid's scream had come. No, sweeterling, Ellaria was quick enough, the hand Sansa hadn't taken catching the back of Sansa's neck, that at least, if she could not turn her back, as Sansa guessed she meant to do, she made Sansa feel a little stronger as she saw what must have caused the commotion. She had lain there frozen there long enough for the guards to come in, Sansa realized, between the scream and the sight of Ellaria which brought her back to herself. One of them had covered it with a cloak. But it was clear enough what the shape was in the trunk Zia had opened, the one meant to contain what clothes Ellaria had arranged to be brought from the Red Keep. Dimly, she was aware of Ellaria climbing into her bed, still holding her hand. "Oh, my dear," she sighed, squeezing it, "we thought to carry you from the room, but I feared that would be worse." "Yes." Sansa could barely hear the word, and it took her a moment to realize that she had uttered it. "No. Yes. I mean, yes, you were right, I would not have wanted that." "Thank you," she added, and heard Ellaria sigh, and then felt a strange warmth beside her, and realized belatedly that it was the lady herself. It was she who moved, rather than drawing Sansa away, inching a little closer and moving her arm from the gentle hold on Sansa's neck to draping around her shoulders. "Oh, my dear," Ellaria murmured again, and Sansa felt, suddenly, as though another touch might shatter her. "I am all right," she said, in that same strange way she had got sometimes in the Red Keep, where it was as if someone else were speaking. She felt like a mummer pulling on a puppet's strings. Somehow she even seemed to be looking, not through her own eyes, but down at herself, as a mummer would her puppet. Carefully, she drew away from the Lady Sand. "Do you know?" "The fool," came a voice. She had not noticed Prince Oberyn either, then, and he was a hard man to miss. He had known what she meant to ask, though. He was lifting the edge of the cloak that covered the body, but at such an angle that all she could see was the orange silk. "It's one of those fools of Joffrey's, the one you—" He did not finish, perhaps afraid to upset her further, but from the distant place she had gone, she was not surprised at all. "Dontos. Sir Dontos Hollard," Sansa corrected herself, still in that strange distant voice which she only half recognized as her own. "He was a knight once. Whatever else he had been, he was a true knight to her." Eventually, dimly, she was aware of Ellaria guiding her gently from the room, her strong, warm arm still draped over Sansa's shoulders. She realized that they had turned toward Prince Oberyn's rooms only once Ellaria drew her into a chaise by the fireplace. She stayed with her, drew her in closer than she had held her in the bed, even. Somehow, Sansa did not feel quite so brittle now. The maid, Sansa managed. Her throat felt strange, tight and raw, as if she had been screaming, though of course she hadn't. "Shella," she heard someone say. "Zia," she realized, looking up. There was a strange softness in the maid's eyes. "She's in the kitchens now, lady." "It wasn't, please, she couldn't help the noise, anyone would have." Ellaria hushed her, but Zia seemed to understand, though she only looked sadder. "Of course they would have, lady." "It's all right," she said, kneeling beside the chaise, so that her eyes were at the same level as Sansa's. She smiled, and patted her hand. "She's in no trouble. She's in the kitchens for some hot spiced wine, and Maester Skiven cook a little something extra to put in it besides. Sir Demons asked her a few questions, but after the wine, she'll have a good long sleep, and be right as rain soon enough." It wasn't her fault, Sansa said, though she didn't really think she needed to, and she heard Ellaria's breath catch, saw how Zia smiled gently. "She feels sorry for me," Sansa realized, and remembered that it was Zia who had told Ellaria and Prince Oberyn about her scars. "Of course it wasn't," Lady Zia said, and gave Sansa another smile. "I'll be sure to tell her you're worried for her. She'll love you even more for it, and she loves you well enough already." Shella was one of the youngest maids, and she'd been shy with Sansa at first, but loved to sing as she worked, and they had taught each other songs. "She oughtn't," Sansa said, before she could help herself. "She oughtn't love me, certainly not now. It's my fault, isn't it? That it happened." Zia bit her lip, and Sansa felt a brush of soft lips at her temple. "No, my dear," Ellaria murmured, her hand around Sansa tightening. Zia, with a curtsy and one last sad look, departed. She could not have said how long they sat like that, Ellaria's arms about her, gazing into the fire. Eventually, Ellaria guided her to her feet again, but instead of taking her back to her rooms, or outside, she drew her through Prince Oberyn's bedchambers and into his private bath. She could not have said how long they stayed there, either. Ellaria sat behind her, stroking her hair and singing softly, until at last, she spoke. "Would you like to tell me about him?" she asked, her voice hardly loud enough for Sansa to hear over her own heartbeat, the little reply sounds of the water embracing her. "You needn't, of course, but if it might lighten your heart even a little." "There isn't much to tell, in truth," Sansa said. She was surprised, as much as she could be, distant as she was in that strange mummer's vantage whence she looked down on herself, by how cold her voice was. But perhaps coldness was only to be expected from a puppet, trying its best to be a girl. "Before Joffrey's name Adatoni, I had barely spoken to him." But a memory tugged at her, and before she could stop herself, she said, "When I went before Joff, to plead for my father, Sedontos was the only one in the court who greeted me, only because he didn't know any better, I suppose." Sir Balon stopped him, whispered